Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the September 24th, 2019 City Council meeting. Please let the record show that all council members are present, with the exception of Chair Nadolski, who is asked to be excused. I've asked Councilmember Stevens to do the pledge for us this evening, if you'd like.
Thank you. Will all rise?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I just want to make sure to welcome all the diversity commissioners. They're out there in the audience. I'm sure they'll all get introduced here in a little bit. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. One item of note, this evening we have a housing fact-finding scheduled for 7 p.m. So we'd like to just make sure everyone knows, depending on the time that we have for the council meeting, we may have a recess and go into that fact-finding session at around 7 o'clock. Depending, the last couple weeks, our sessions have gone quite late. So we want to make sure to get to that housing fact-finding session around 7. So we'll see how we proceed in the schedule. And just so you're aware, for public comment, for example, part of that may end up after that, or maybe the reports from the Planning Commission. We'll have to see how the time goes. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Great. So I'm looking for a representative for the breast cancer recognition. I'm not sure I see him here just yet. If Colt Jarvis was going to be here.
I don't see him.
I don't see him either. Should we
switch?
Yeah, should we switch? Would that be okay with everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know if we need an agenda change. So we'll first do the Domestic Violence Awareness Month proclamation, and I believe that Councilmember Heyer is going to be presenting that. And we have Margaret Rose from Your Community Connection, or YCC, and also Danette Stanger here. We'll ask you to come up after they read the proclamation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Acting Chair Traberka.
I'll just make it as long as possible.
Yeah, we make it a long time. Yep, okay. It's my pleasure to make this proclamation, declaring October 2019 Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Ogden City. Whereas domestic violence has affected members of our community and individuals throughout the world, sadly, many victims of this horrific crime suffer in silence because they are afraid to seek help. It is crucial that members of our community feel safe and comfortable seeking help when needed. And whereas it is estimated that more than 10 million people experience domestic violence every year. While domestic violence is known primarily as physical abuse, it has many other forms, including emotional, sexual, financial, or psychological. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month is nationally recognized every October and first began by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence as a day of unity to connect battered women's advocates across the country. This month is an opportunity to help our community promote and protect the safety and freedom of all who seek refuge from this terrible crime. And whereas Your Community Connection, YCC of Ogden, is dedicated to help victims of domestic violence by providing advocacy, education, services, and resources. Throughout their programs, individuals and families can feel a sense of hope, safety, and protection. And whereas Ogden City encourages members of the community to work together to increase domestic violence awareness, doing so will enable members of our community to feel safe and secure. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Ogden City Council and Mayor Michael P. Caldwell hereby proclaim October 2019 Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Ogden City. And we encourage residents, schools, businesses, and community groups to recognize the importance of domestic violence awareness. We appreciate the efforts of YCC of Ogden and all other institutions and organizations that encourage domestic violence awareness throughout our community. So I would make a motion that we adopt joint proclamation declaring October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Ogden City.
I second it.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Councilmember Heyer and a second by Councilmember Stevens for the joint proclamation. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That passes. Yeah, come on up.
Start on this end. Thank you.
Keep coming.
Keep going.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. My hands are very cold. It's part of those. I have to see like that. And then we'll do a picture, if you don't mind.
Right there.
Right there. We stand in front? Yeah.
With our
Cheater. They're not.
She's learning.
She's just right next to that
You're
guy.
learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, right here.
Thank you. If you'd like to say something, you're welcome to go.
So just as
Oh, you can come to the mic.
Yeah, just to the mic.
Sorry.
Sorry, just for the recorder, they have to be able to
They have to
hear
hear
you.
you.
We like to try to make you as nervous as possible.
Okay.
You have to step up to the mic.
Is it working?
Just as representatives of the YCC, I want to thank you very much. It's not every city recognizes domestic violence as a significant issue in their community, and the fact that Ogden City Council does and partners with the YCC and has for many years is really exciting to us. And I'm grateful to be part of this community and doing the work that we have, that we will continue to do, that we have done for many, many years. So I'm really fortunate to have Danette on our team and working alongside us.
And we are just so grateful, not only tonight to have you present this proclamation, but for the good work that Ogden City does day after day. Ogden City has continued to be a leader in solving this public health crisis that affects so many through expanding their systems-based advocates, by having innovative programs through their justice court and the district court, but also they're always leaders when we do new projects like the lethality assessment protocol. Ogden City was one of the first people that joined onto that, and they have made such a remarkable difference. So we appreciate your support tonight, but we also appreciate the support we feel every day. So thank you on behalf of our community, on the staff, but especially the clients that this impacts, and we're so grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Vice Chair Chaburk, if I could just make one real quick comment. Margaret's new to our community, although she still lives in Salt Lake. She drives up here too as the new executive director. And I just want to also say that it's not just an area for domestic violence. It's a shelter for childcare. It does family enrichment, and in working with our homeless population as well. So it's an honor to be Margaret's friend and learning a lot about the YCC. So I appreciate you doing that as well.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it too. I work with you all in my day job, but also I just found out, I guess, about a year ago that they have a thrift shop there. So make sure you go shopping there to help their efforts too.
I learned a lot about the YCC from Julie, of course, and there is a need, and domestic violence is a serious problem. It's nice that we have some awareness of that. It is devastating to people to have unjustified violence against them, and appreciate all that you do.
Any other comments? Okay. Thank you. Well, we just had word that unfortunately Colt won't be able to join us tonight, but we'll go ahead with the recognition for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and that is Councilmember Blair.
Yes. Thank you. This is a joint proclamation of the Ogden City Council and Mayor declaring October 2019 Breast Cancer Awareness Month in Ogden City. And it reads, whereas breast cancer continues to take its toll in our community and throughout the world, all too often the signs and symptoms of this disease are overlooked. It is crucial that our residents are aware of the symptoms of this disease and the necessary steps to prevent it. And whereas, other than skin cancer, breast cancer is the most common cancer among women in the United States. Each year, the month of October is dedicated to increase awareness of this disease, encourage early detection and preventative measures, and to raise funds for research. And whereas Breast Cancer Awareness Month is an opportunity to spread awareness and to educate our residents on the importance of screening and early detection. The overall health and well-being of members in our community is crucial to the growth of Ogden City. And whereas the American Cancer Society is an organization devoted to saving lives by fighting to eradicate cancer, they provide research, screenings, cancer education, encourage prevention, and promote healthy lifestyles. And whereas Ogden City encourages members of the community to work together to increase breast cancer awareness and to wear pink in support of those who are suffering from this disease. Doing so will unify our community and ensure the health and safety of our residents. Now therefore be it resolved that the Ogden City Council and Mayor Michael P. Caldwell hereby proclaim October 2019 Breast Cancer Awareness Month in Ogden City. We encourage residents, schools, businesses, and community groups to recognize the importance of breast cancer awareness. We appreciate the efforts of the American Cancer Society and other institutions and organizations that encourage breast cancer awareness and prevention in our community. And with that, I will go ahead and make a motion that we adopt this joint proclamation.
Second.
Ooh, that was a tie.
I have the pink ribbon on.
Yeah, and he already had a speaking part, you know. So we have a motion by Councilmember Blair and a second by Councilmember White for the joint proclamation for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That passes. And we'll make sure that...
we'll hold on to this and then
make sure. Thank you very much. So now we have a request to be on the agenda. Viviana Felix is going to present the Diversity Commission's fiscal year 2019 annual report and fiscal year 2020 action plan. Thank you, Viviana. And I hope we'll introduce all the the commissioners that have made the effort to come. I really appreciate it.
Vice Chair, maybe she could do that first.
Oh, whatever you'd like. I don't know where it was in your schedule.
So I know some of them were able to make it today, but for those of you that don't know me, my name is Viviana Felix, and I work here in Ogden City, and I do staff the Ogden Diversity Commission. Today, present, we have our chair and vice chair, so Chair Priscilla Martinez, if you want to wave or stand up, and our vice chair, Jeremy Shinoda. And then we have Commissioners Kathy Darby, Taylor Knuth, Wesley Boykin, and Amy Noshirvan. And did I miss anybody? No. So I think that's who we have today.
Great. Thanks so much for coming, everybody.
First of all, thank you for having us and allowing me to present to you our annual report. The Diversity Commission continues to be active in our community and has done so since it initiated back in 2017 through mostly outreach efforts and, as of this year, community events. We continue to meet on a regular basis, and we continue to invite organizations and different entities to our meetings to learn more about the work that is being done here in Ogden. So here's everybody that currently sits on our commission. We do have Commissioners Kai Halos, I always do that, Oscar Mata, and Betty Sawyer, Adrian Andrews, who weren't able to make it today. Also Commissioner Jason Stokes. To help the Commission overall address some of the needs and concerns in the community, we have functional committees, and we currently have 3 of them. Outreach being chaired by our Vice Chair, Commissioner Jeremy Shinoda. And this is probably our most active and visible portion of the commission. The outreach committee essentially goes out into community events and hosts a table at these community events or helps sponsor in some way efforts. Our Vice Chair Shinoda does a great job at keeping a calendar of dates and information that happen here in Ogden City, and that really keeps the commission engaged with community events. We also have our committee looking into the topic of poverty in Ogden City, and this is chaired by Commissioner Amy Nasherbon. Although the Commissioner Nasherbon recently got appointed as the chair for this committee, they have outlined different participation that they will be doing in collaboration with current organizations and entities that work on this topic in Ogden so that they themselves are informed and can better support these efforts. Lastly, we have our Employment and Resource Committee, which just got assigned a new chair, which is Commissioner Wesley Boykin. And we're working on that, on a name and a new strategy for that, but essentially it is to bring community and resources together, whether that be an event or a committee, or we're working on what that will look like. So some of the highlights from last fiscal year, so counting from June of last year or July of last year to June of this year. These were some of the highlights that happened, and that the commission, the Ogden Diversity Commission, was able to help facilitate or collaborate with. One of the biggest highlights was the support that the commission was able to give to the Christchurch Community Vigil that happened out in the footsteps of the municipal building. We were able to collaborate with our Ogden Muslim community to create a space where people could come together and talk about this event and the tragedy that happened in New Zealand. Our second event that happened was an attempt to re-engage the community that started the conversation on creating the Ogden Diversity Commission or something like it. And this happened in April, and we had a community dinner where we invited old and new friends to have a conversation on kind of the process of getting to the Diversity Commission and what has happened since the inception of the commission and what we looked for moving forward. This is also an opportunity for the community to engage in one of our functional committees, either by supporting or wanting to be on that committee. We have our Spring Forward Job Fair, which was job fair and resources, and it was targeted towards ages of 14 to 19 to kind of prepare our young adults for the job force and to give them the skills that they would need to be good and successful employees. We were able to collaborate with Weber State University, including the Community Education Center and the Career Services, who actually had some workshops for the young adults. And finally, we launched our Facebook page, which if you haven't liked it already, please like it. It would really help. But this is an opportunity for the commission to interact with our community in a different way. We post resources relevant to our community, as well as inform them of opportunities, whether that be events or a workshop or something of that nature. So for the fiscal year of 2019-2018, the commission will be working towards the following. Citywide initiative involvement, which consists of communicating with administration and city council on the availability and utilization of the Diversity Commission for citywide initiatives. And it's just to offer a perspective on items that can be anything from strategic plans to community development to event ideas. It's just to utilize the commission more and bring in that perspective that can maybe help enlighten some of these ideas. With the census, the commission plans to promote this at our outreach tabling and also support and help educate our community. We do understand that there's still fear, although that there is no citizenship question on the census. However, that fear still exists, and trying to lessen that fear in hopes to get a complete and accurate count. Employment and hiring practices. The commission would like to develop best hiring practices that could be used across the city. This includes partnering with agencies to see what they are doing in regards to diversifying their employment pool and looking at equity plans so that we can share best practices across the board. With communication, this just includes developing and maintaining a formal communication and approval process to deliver information to the mayor, administration, and as well city council. We have that already in the works and hope to share that with you all soon. Expanding public meetings in our attempt to engage audience. We recognize that our regular meeting time is not very convenient for a lot of individuals, so we have established quarterly meeting times that will be held in the evening. I invite you all and everybody who's listening to our next quarterly meeting that will be held November 13 at 5:30 p.m. here at the main library, which is just off of Jefferson Avenue. And finally, just leveraging current resources. So we hope to use the commission's capacity within Ogden City to provide information to Ogden residents on current community resources such as immigration assistance, food banks, low-cost medical assistance, and many more. We will also continue to partner and support current organizations and groups that are working in our community. And in summary, going forward, we hope that the creation of a formal method of communication with both mayor and city council will allow us to focus on community needs. We would like to see the Diversity Commission utilized more by both bodies in being the source that informs you of issues and concerns in our diverse communities. The annual action plan presented to you attempts to address some of the current community concerns. However, we understand that there are more, and we have to become aware of those as a body. And by body, I mean Ogden City in general. So with that, I thank you for your time. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Viviana?
I think she did an outstanding job. Appreciate that. I think this is what makes Ogden a little bit different, is that we feel that everyone is welcomed here. I don't know, is it appropriate for them to look into housing for the diversity? I'm not sure about that. How would that be if they looked there?
We can definitely look at it, maybe break it down and narrow it down to a specific topic that they can look at.
Both renters and maybe owners or something like that. I don't know. It's something you could look at and see.
Maybe we can make some kind of formal request if that's something we'd like them to do.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. I know this is a new commission, and I appreciate you and all of your efforts, because the growing pains, I can tell by our last meeting together, have been a little difficult. So hopefully we can, by using this action plan or this annual action plan concept, actually help us move you guys forward and us forward as well. So I appreciate you guys coming to us, because it's not always easy to knock us in the head and say, hey, we need a different process. So thank you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the work that you do every day, and the diversity commissioners for volunteering their time in this effort. And I look forward to how we're going to continue to build on the action plan. I know a lot of people have talked about the budget before. You know, like, oh, the diversity commission has such a limited budget. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, so the first year that we were awarded a budget was actually last year, and we were awarded $5,750, which for the amount of events that we had was just appropriate enough. This year we have taken a different strategy. Instead of doing like a strategy for 2 to 3 years, we're working more on a 1 year basis. And so it will be interesting to see how that budget that we have, it's the same amount, will play into this new action plan.
Do you feel like you need more budget, or?
I can't say right now because a lot of it is leveraging current resources available in the city. So we are already as a city working on the census and already as a city working on some of these other projects. But I mean, if we do need money, we will ask for more money.
We would hope you would.
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, so it looks like we have some approval of the minutes. So we have the closed session of February 19th, 2019, regular meeting of April 2nd, 2019, and the work session of April 16th, 2019. That's Councilmember Heyer.
Yes, I have reviewed those and found them to be accurate to the best of my recollection.
And the regular meeting of April 23rd, 2019, Councilmember Blair.
Yes, I have reviewed those and found them to be accurate.
And the joint work session of May 21st, 2019, Councilmember White.
Yes, I've reviewed those and found them to be accurate as well.
And the regular meeting of May 21st, 2019, Councilmember Stevens.
Yes, Vice Chair, they're correct.
And finally, the regular meeting of May 28th, 2019, Councilmember Lopez.
Yes, Vice Chair Chavarka, I reviewed the minutes, found them to be accurate to the best of my recollection, and I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Lopez and a second by Councilmember Blair to approve, the minutes. Is this a voice vote? Mm-hmm. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank you. That passes. Now we have on the agenda common consent for Ogden City Arts Advisory Committee. Do we have a presentation for that, or is it just the common consent? Okay,
Just
great.
common consent. Both those items will be
Great.
one motion.
And then also the Ogden Trails Network Committee. So it's appointments and reappointments for the Arts Advisory Committee and appointments for the Ogden Trails Network.
Vice Chair Chavarka, I would make a motion that we approve the common consent agenda as it's listed.
Second.
Is there any other discussion about that item? No. All in favor? Is this, yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that passes. And we really appreciate the volunteer work of those committee members. We couldn't do all that work without you. Now we have reports from the Planning Commission, proposed rezone at 2633 Adams Avenue. And Greg Montgomery is stepping to the podium.
Council members, this is a petition that had been filed with the city last year, and time frames and meeting with the proposed applicant. There were some delays that took place. The Planning Commission finally reviewed this item and in February of this year, and it's for their recommendation on to you for consideration tonight. The request is to look at rezoning a parcel of land about 5,300 square feet located on Adams Avenue, 2633. It's a vacant lot. As you can see in this air photo, to the north is a parking lot, to the west is a parking lot. There's a single-family home to the south, another parking lot, and then two more single-family homes, and then the job service building along this portion of Adams Avenue. To the north of the corner is a tire store, an old service station area that has been reused. And so that kind of gives you the lay of the land of what is taking place here. and the location of this property. Zoning-wise, this is on the edge of the CBD zone. You can see that turquoise, teal, whatever color you want to call that, is the CBD zone. And so it, again, is on the edge of the CBD zone. It also is presently R3EC, and the properties to the south and also across the street to the east are in the R3EC zone.
Excuse me, Vice Chair. Acting Chair George. I'd like to make a request. If for a lot of people that don't know what the zoning means,
I'll explain what those are.
Anyway, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a lot of letters and numbers. That's
No,
true.
that is. So what that is R3EC means generally this is to single family to multiple family housing at medium density range. Means that on the property you could develop a single family home. If this had enough lot area, it could develop up to about 23 units an acre on the property. This property, however, is only 5,300 square feet, so it only can be developed as a single family, though properties around it, especially to the east, have developed into apartment buildings. The zone also allows, as I said, multiple family buildings. The height limits are 35 feet, 2.5 stories, if a single family home were built on the property. If multiple family was built, it would be 4 stories would be the limits. The CBD stands for Central Business District. And what that zone allows is a variety of commercial and residential uses. And so that mix can take place either on one lot. You can have a commercial use on part of the building, residential use above it, or strictly multiple family residential. There is no height limit in the CBD zone, though a lot of it, how big a building would be dependent on the piece of property that's underneath it and how they can utilize it to meet parking and the building footprint. So those are some things that kind of control what development may occur in the future. So this property is kind of on the edge of those two different zones. So those activities can happen to the north and to the west of that now. Or if it's rezoned, that can become part of that property potential, especially when you've got parking lot on either side of it. The question is raised is, would someone build a single-family home on that lot, giving those commercial uses around that property? So that's the reason why a petition was filed, to kind of address that issue. So again, there's the commercial parking areas that exist. There's the property. And you can see how over time this side of Adams Avenue has transitioned. What had been a residential area on both sides of the street, there's only 3 residential properties left that are utilized for that on the west side. Everything else has become commercialized. And that's important to understand when you look to the east side of Adams Avenue. You see those number of apartment buildings that have been built along Adams Avenue, that this area is kind of a transition area of a lot of different things happening. And so there's not a consistent one type of development that's taking place in this area over time.
This was the reason that one of the commissioners voted against this project.
His question was, is there the continuity and the balance between both sides of the street? And that shouldn't the zoning look at that balance between? If you look at just go back and look at the zoning, you can see even on Adams Avenue to the north, on both sides is zoned commercial CBD, commercial. And so when you talk about balance, where is that balance? Because even as you cross 26th Street and go south, the first 3 lots, even on Adams Avenue, are commercial, are CBD. And so that's that kind of question of where is the balance? That zoning map, while it reflects what could be, if you added the state office building in there on the corner, that's another commercial activity that's exempt from local zoning. But if you gave it land use, that would also appear blue. So you'd really start to see that area kind of disintegrate in any type of continuity on that west side of Adams Avenue.
Thank you.
So this is the lot, 40 by 132 feet. As you can see, the home that's next to it. The proposal, while this is not a development agreement where they're saying this is what's actually going to be built, was looking at something that can fit onto a small lot size and allow the variety of uses to take place to better utilize that vacant piece of ground, given its surroundings. One of the questions that came up in the discussion with the Planning Commission is, what does the CBD plan talk about? And the CBD plan talks about this area being single-family housing. And the commission looked at that and said, okay, if the plan talks about single-family housing around here, what is the reality of what's there and what would be developed versus some of the zoning policies? One of the key parts the commission looked at is this area in transition? In other words, have the uses changed over time period to this is no longer really a single-family neighborhood because of the uses which are taking place on that west side? And so the commission, as they discussed this, felt that that really is more of an important item of consideration of the area being in transition. In other words, the uses changing, of buildings torn down, and the character of that west side really not being a single-family neighborhood anymore. And so as they looked at that and balanced those policies with what the plan said, they really kind of leaned towards the majority of them rezoning. The other thing they looked at is the East Central plan, since this is on that edge of both. The East Central plan talks about that area being multiple family and commercial. And so as they tried to weigh both of those together, there were some conflicts, and they felt that the best approach to this would be to look at the extension of the CBD zone or the commercial mixed-use zone. They are recommending to you in a 7-1 vote to rezone the property from R3C to CBD, from the multifamily residential to commercial residential. The no vote by Commissioner Herman was concerned about the symmetry of the uses on either side of the street, and that not all CBD uses would be appropriate in that location. To that last point, I want to make explanation that since this was approved, the city had established a pending ordinance in May. And some of those incompatible uses that were discussed at the meetings, such as service stations, convenience stores, drive-up windows, those things are being eliminated from the CBD zone. And you'll be receiving a recommendation on that soon. But some of those items were brought up in that meeting back in February, have now been addressed by another ordinance which will be coming to you for consideration, but which is basically in effect because of the pending ordinance that has been published back in May of this year. So that addresses some of that lower portion of appropriate uses by eliminating some uses which may not be appropriate in that area.
Thank you, Greg. Does anybody have any questions for Greg? I know the petitioner is also here,
Correct.
right? We can ask Greg some questions or move on to the petitioner.
Can you, before he leaves,
Sure.
we did get an email from a constituent. Can you address that how it does not meet the lot size requirements for the CBD, just in general?
The CBD does not have a lot size requirement. A few years ago, we had minimum standards in terms of densities and development, but those were removed. So right now, there is not a minimum lot area required for residential development.
And then also I'm not quite sure what GP historic preservation provisions are, but can you speak to the historic nature of this area, or by removing the zone from R3EC to CBD, does that change
Okay.
to the GP historical preservation?
I think it's general plan.
General
I would
plan.
guess general plan.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm just trying to have him answer these questions.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. Trying to get,
So many
just
letters.
go to this map right now. So I think the question is maybe two parts, and again, not having seen it, but what you're telling me is two things. One is the removal of buildings that have been, this area had traditionally been a residential neighborhood with single family and mixed use apartments scattered throughout. The city, of course, tore down an apartment at the corner of Adams and 26th Street, which some considered, and when it was originally built, would have met historic criteria, but add-ons and revisions to it, and plus the condition of the building required it to be taken down. So that corner was removed. This had a house on it one time. That's been removed. And I think the question is, with removal of older buildings in the city, how does that establish that we're still trying to protect our historic character? And does this encourage other buildings to be torn down in the future for new development to take place? And I think...
So there are no standards in the R3EC zone?
The R3EC zone does talk about architectural design standards for new construction to try to meet the character of what that overall area was. So a bungalow style, building materials, those are all items that would be required if a new home were to be built there. It is to reflect the character of the overall historic district, but is not historic preservation. Historic preservation is where those items are designated on the local or the national register, which these in this location is not, because there's no building there.
But there is nothing in the general plan that says we're supposed to keep them.
The idea is we are supposed to be trying to preserve our history and our character and those buildings that are significant, to try to retain those, to preserve that story of who we are. In this question, with the vacant lot, there's no preservation involved. The question is more compatibility now for what would happen in the future.
I have one question, or a couple there. I'd like to go to the standards and the character. Since we've removed that, if it is passed, are there any standards, or if he wants to build another building on there that would be required housing, are there any standards that he would have to go by that would add to the character of the neighborhood?
If the property is in the CBD zone, unlike the R3C, it would have to be reviewed by the Planning Commission. And one of the items the Planning Commission looks at is compatibility in terms of architectural style and materials. Those are things, while not specific details are in the plan or in the ordinance, those are the items the Planning Commission looks at and saying, how is this compatible in those features of design and materials to create a character? The R3C says you have to do these certain types of design things. So the R3C does have more prescriptive standards than the CBD, but the CBD is reviewed by the Planning Commission and the mayor rather than just staff. So there's a kind of a switch of how do you review it, a public review or staff review. R3C is just staff review. CBD is the public review before the Planning Commission and the mayor and the decisions made.
So let's go back to that standard again. If he puts a commercial item, a building on here, what standards would be there, and what businesses would be allowed in this area here?
Most retail office uses could take place. Live workspaces, so you could have, if you wanted an office on the main floor, you could have dwellings on an upper floor. Or is it strictly office or strictly multiple family? Yeah. All those options exist out there. But as I said, some of the more intensive uses that require automobiles would not be permitted, as we're revising those in the CBD at this point.
I'd like to go back to the neighbor that's to the side of this building. Is there any requirements to have him develop a buffer area to protect the privacy of that resident?
Under the R3 zone, or the present zoning, there's required a 5-foot side yard setback. So there'd be a 5-foot minimum distance between the property and a building. And that building could then be 35 feet tall under the present zoning for a single-family home. Under the CBD, there are setbacks of 10 to 15 feet if it's parking. If it's building, the building code is going to kind of dictate what that distance is, because you can't have any openings within the first 5 feet. So if they wanted to have windows or things like that, they would have that 5-foot setback, which would be the same as the R3 EC zone. So that side yard would be about the same distance at that point.
But if they don't?
If they don't have windows and make it fire rated, they could build to property line.
Sounds like we might have some questions for the petitioner.
Okay.
Maybe?
Just one more question.
Sure.
Can you please repeat or even just expand just a little bit more about the dissenting vote? I think you said the commissioner was concerned about the symmetry or something like that.
Yeah. Having the same zone on both sides of the street and having a balance of the same type of uses. So that's symmetry of what's on the east side being on the west side. Okay. And as I explained, even between 26th Street and going south, the first 3 lots are CBD or are commercial on both sides of the street. And then that CBD goes a little bit further on the west side.
Can you please, can you go back to that map?
Yeah, right there. So that brownish color is the R3 EC. So you can see 26th and Adams. So as you go south, the first 3 lots on both sides are commercial. Then another lot on the west side is commercial.
So why not do the whole block CBD?
I think one of the things the Planning Commission looked at, and that there's always a possibility they were just reacting to that petitioner's request.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. So in a time where we are looking to try to increase our density of housing, it seems like this might actually be counterintuitive to increasing multifamily. Was consideration given to that?
Well, actually, I mean, that's what the CBD would do. It would allow multiple family where under the present
but only
zoning.
if they use it for multifamily, right?
Huh?
Only if they use it for multifamily.
Only if they have the option.
Could, use it for commercial zone.
Yeah. Under the R3, it can only be used as a single family because of the lot size.
Okay.
We're hearing from the petitioner, right?
Yeah, I believe so. The petitioner here? No. Welcome. Thanks for coming. If you don't mind just stating your name for the record, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm Mark Steffen. I'm the petitioner.
Welcome.
And my name is Tony Pantone. I'm an architect with Bott
I don't know if
Pantone
you guys need to
Architects.
move the mic just a little bit. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tony Pantone. I'm an architect with Bott Pantone Architects here in Ogden, working with Mark on this project. And I don't know that we have a whole lot to add to what Greg has explained and what's been already discussed and addressed. We appreciate your time in reviewing this petition for a rezone. Mark's intent, I'll let Mark speak for himself, but Mark's intent and kind of desire is to develop potentially a mixed-use development or possibly a small multifamily project. And so that's the reasoning for this proposal today. There are some challenges with the property. Obviously, with the size of it, parking is a big challenge, and we've discussed, and Mark has some potential ideas on how to address that. But the first step, of course, is getting this rezone approval and then addressing those in the future. So if you have any questions for us, we'd be glad to answer anything that you have.
Sure. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I would just follow on with what Tony said. The goal would be to, I think the question is about whether this would reduce the ability to have more housing. It currently can only have a single family house based on the size of the lot. So the goal would be to have mixed use with multifamily. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'd like to have him address the parking, and if Craig could give us an idea of what parking would be permitted on this property. But what ideas did you have for the parking?
Currently, the parking would be pretty limited, right? Potentially three spaces. Ideally, it would be partnering with other properties nearby so that we could have additional parking either on adjacent property or with one, I think within 200 feet, you can use nearby parking. So that would be the goal if the scope expanded, but without expanding the size of the lot or getting off-site parking. It's pretty
going to
limited.
be limited to 3 residential units with the availability of parking on the current property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Are you considering acquiring other properties around the area, or I don't know if you can divulge
I'd
that.
rather,
That's too
I'd
much
rather
information.
not. Potentially, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming.
Okay,
Looks
thank you.
like
Thank
we
you.
have questions.
I have one more question for
Oh,
Greg.
For Greg, if you don't mind, Greg, and then we'll have public input.
So on this proposal, is there something that we can do that would go ahead and approve the rezone if the thing goes through? You know, I guess I'm not finding the right words, but if they're not able to figure out how to use that property that requires the CBD, could it just remain R3EC?
Generally, you'd probably put a note that you'd like to revisit it and consider whether to rezone it back after a certain time frame. I don't know that you'd make a contingent upon this happens, but you'd approve it and then just say, we'll revisit again, because you can always change zones.
Sure.
And if you feel that you've looked at it at this point, it's not meeting it, it still sits vacant, you could always go back and rezone it again.
Okay.
What about the parking? That was brought up there. Is there a standard for this on the parking issue?
So parking right now is defined for residential 1.5 stalls per unit. There are provisions that the Planning Commission can grant reductions of the parking if it finds certain criteria are met. Commercial parking can occur with a lease from other parking areas within 500 feet. So they can meet the need for commercial parking by having it off-site. And again, there's parking lots around them. They might be able to work out something with those people in terms of, because those lots aren't really heavily utilized.
Okay.
So those are options they have.
That answered my question.
Thanks. Any other questions over here? The consulting. Thank you, Greg and Petitioner. So this is now we'll accept public input on this item, and it's only about this particular item, the rezone at 2633 Adams Avenue. If anybody has any comments about it.
Hi, Travis Pate. My concern, I actually sat with you and several concerns from the neighborhood with regards to it doesn't meet current zoning guidelines, which is the opposite sides of the street should match the zoning. The east side of the street is R3, and so is this side. And if you rezone, then you've just gone against some of those planning guidelines that say that the street should be like in character. Also, Bob Herman, which is on the Planning Commission, said that that should not be the dividing line. The street should not be the dividing line. It should be the rear property lines. And so with this already currently zoned R3, there's a lot of opportunities. But if not, because it's not being zoned mixed use, which would then come with a development agreement, then there's not a transition between CBD and residential property. And we've talked about having a CBD overlay zone. That's yet to come into fruition. And so if there wasn't a CBD overlay zone, then they could possibly change this zoning to be part of that overlay zone and have the transition, because then there'd be defined guidelines as to what would be allowed on there, instead of just, so to speak, the full weight of the CBD coming right into that property. It is unlimited, the height restrictions in the CBD zone. Does that concern anyone? Other than for every 1 foot that the building is above, or every 2 feet, it has to be 1 more foot away from residential zone. And so the fact that there's an unlimited height on there, and if they do acquire other property, then they could possibly appeal at that time once there's the design and other guidelines saying, here's what we'd like to do with this property, and here's how we're going to transition it into the residential zone. When there's a continued encroachment into the residential zone, why did we just invest $700,000 in unit reduction into this neighborhood to just put the density right back in the doorstep, and not only put the residency back in the doorstep, but to change the zoning to accommodate it? It's not current. It's not prudent. None of the things, it doesn't match the Adams Avenue CRA. And so it's also, is this body the one that's supposed to hear this? Should it go to the redevelopment agency also? Because it's in the Adams Avenue community reinvestment area. And so it would be premature for this body, I think, to present that and change that when the property actually should go to the RDA first for approval, site approval, everything else, and meet and match the Adams Avenue CRA prior to coming to this body. And so I think that it's premature how it is. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't accommodate other aspects, because if you actually go into Weaver State Archives and look, there's a beautiful building proposed for 26th and Adams that's part of the Leslie Hodgson's architectural plans that are in the documented archives at Weaver State for one of those corners. It doesn't say specifically which corner on 26th and Adams, but that would easily be a welcome thing. Here's something designed, something that was already historically accurate, and it would be welcome. So we're not saying no, but we're just saying not yet. It's just, it's premature, especially without a development agreement. It's premature with the residential aspects of the district. William Kay, the founder of Kaysville, his family home is in its 4th generation of being owner occupied. And you're going to, if this goes through, it's just going to be the camel nose inside the tent. And before you know it, the entire camel's in the tent. The entire district's demolished. And no local preservation guidelines are followed because it's not on the local resources. So we need to say no to the current rezone. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. I think Ralph had public comment about this item.
Yeah,
And John's coming up.
good evening.
Is this about the Adams Avenue rezone?
No.
Okay, it has to be
You're-
about
You're
that.
still doing that?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's public input for that item right now.
There's traffic behind you.
Oh yeah, there's going to be a traffic
There's-
jam.
He wants to comment on Adam's Avenue.
Ralph Price. Yes, I do want to comment. Beautifully said what he just said. I'd like to reiterate all of that because I think the redevelopment to go through this first, I think it'd be premature for you guys to go ahead and do it. You look at both sides of Adams right there. You look at Jefferson, you look at downtown and everything, and the beautiful job you've done there. Adams has been a forgotten spot, but it is a spot that has historical basis to it. And there's some beautiful things, as he said, in the plans for Adams. I think it would be just atrocity to go ahead and give an approval and remove this and change this at this time when we don't have it fully researched on it. Now, one of the things I want to bring up too is that I believe this would be a key issue with the minorities and with the diversity of that area right there. You did the things that you did for Jefferson. It turned it completely out of the range for any minorities or anybody else to be there. But it started out piece by piece being taken away, redeveloped and reassigned and put into projects. And it turned into a beautiful thing there. But you could probably count on one finger the number of minorities that are able to have access to that. I'd like Adams to be a place for all people here in Ogden City, Weaver County. And that's, right now, it is probably 70% minorities that live along Adams. And this, I would like the attention to be brought to that those communities that are set apart right now that are on both sides of that area is a key, beautiful job that's been done. And I think we can do this right here and still keep the essence of what's going on Adams right here today. That shop that he said there's a tire shop, it's a Hispanic tire shop that's right there on the corner. And you got El Matadors that's on Adams right down there. You got all kinds of things that diversify Ogden, diversify Weaver County and its minorities. and that's along those areas. Houses are being torn down, buildings are being torn down, just so we can go ahead and we can have the next step in whatever it is that's part of the strategic plan. And that's I'm all for everything he just said right there. I think it's premature for you to go ahead and vote on that and change the zoning so they don't have the basis to be able to meet the requirements that we should be able to have for Ogden City here.
Thank you. Any other input on this particular item? I don't think so. Any other, I was wondering if we could speak to the RDA issue that was brought up, whether this is part of the Adams Avenue community redevelopment area and if the RDA should be involved.
Well, there is no RDA money being requested or into this project, so there is no review by the RDA on those type of things. While there are two separate items looking at the same area, it's based on what are they trying to accomplish. One through RDA funding and RDA projects, or one through typical zoning and city processes.
And someone brought up zoning. Does the zoning have to be looked at now before the project, or how does that work, Greg?
So what was brought up was the idea of, do you do conditional overlays rather than just regular zoning? The reason you look at a conditional overlays is that there may be some unique feature that if it were not for a certain design, you would not consider rezoning. And that gives you the opportunity to look at design, site layout, and consider that before you consider zoning. And when people petition for that, and that is a little different process. It's not the typical standard to create a conditional overlay for every type of rezoning request, only if it's looking for something that if it were not that special design at that special location, you would not consider it. So this would be one of those value judgments you need to take a look at. Is this at a key area that you feel that it needs that type of purview to it before considering zoning, or is this a transitional area that because of the parking lots and everything else around it, one way or another, it just becomes a value judgment based on that rather than a design of a specific project?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Looks like that's all. Thank you so much. So this looks like we need to make a decision about whether we're making a motion or.
If I may just make a quick comment, just regarding this topic, I tend to agree. I'm just looking at this map and just I just tend to agree that in my mind it might be wise to wait to see what we could do with the rest of that block. Because even though, as Mr. Montgomery mentioned, that it's already kind of has these elements of some commercial uses and multifamily uses that would qualify under the commercial, but I just really wonder why we wouldn't address the whole block. So anyway, just for whatever it's worth, I wanted to put that out there.
Not usually. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. We're looking at me very skeptical.
Oh, I'm just.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for you.
There's
Any other? Yeah.
there are things to consider that have been raised, and I was just considering them.
Sure.
So
I'd be happy to consider a motion.
Are you considering, or you've got that considering look?
Overall, I actually am not too opposed to that. I think this is
an area that's in transition is in transition. It's in transition because it's in transition, not because we're making it be. Yes, we could probably stop it, but that would generally just stop everything. I'm trying to imagine anybody buying this property and putting a home on it, something that would fit the zone, and I just can't see that happening. So that's why I really appreciate Travis's thoughtful consideration of those things and the things he just brought up. I guess I just don't agree. So that's really where I find myself. And I would make a motion if you're ready, unless somebody else has something else to say.
I guess, my only concern is that, it sounds like there might be some other things in the works, and so we're not really sure what that is. And does it hinge only on this particular decision, whether those other things might happen? And since we don't know what those are, I just feel a little bit like, I'm not so sure,
Yeah.
I don't know. But, yeah, I'm happy to take a motion.
Okay, then, Acting Chair Traburka, I would make a motion then that we adopt proposed ordinance 2019-43.
I second it.
We have a motion by Councilmember Heyer and a second by Councilmember Stevens to adopt proposed ordinance 2019-43, and this is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Blair?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez?
No.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember White?
Aye.
Vice Chair
Do you know what to say? Just call me whatever you would like.
Vice Chair Traburka?
No.
No.
But that still passes, correct? I can count correctly.
Yeah, got four. I would like to. I do have a
Anyone
concern, though,
advocates?
that this actually develop before we are married to the zone. And I guess what I'm saying is we ought to have some kind of a trigger that lets us review whether it's happened or not, whether we ought to revert it back to that zone. I seem to recall we used to have a method by which that happened, but I can't think of what it is now.
Maybe you can talk offline and figure
Maybe.
it out a little bit.
Well, maybe it's just our staff that puts it on their calendar and takes a look at it. And
Yeah, got on your
Okay.
calendar. Put it
Okay.
on there.
let's do
3
that.
years from today. No.
Greg, can you put a note on that if it doesn't develop, that we bring it up again?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Greg's saying yes.
Okay.
I don't know who to believe. Because
Greg.
I believe
Believe
everything.
Greg.
You know. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So, as we said, I know there's a lot of people that came in a little bit late. So we were talking about recessing at this point for the fact-finding work session. But I'd like to kind of take a little bit of a poll. Maybe we should do that really quickly so we can get a gauge on how many public comments we might have from the audience. I'm not trying to force you to make a decision about whether you're doing public comment at this very moment, but we do have probably about an hour-long discussion about housing that we'd like to complete as well, and people are in attendance only for that too. So about how many people, by raise of hand, wanted to make public comment about any topic at all with the council? I think that that's reasonable to go ahead and move forward with that. There's about 6 people, so that's about 20 minutes or so. And then we'll be able to go ahead and go into the fact-finding session. And I really appreciate those of you that are here for the housing fact-finding session, waiting patiently with us. I really appreciate it. So you're welcome to come forward to the mic and just state your name for the record, and you have about 3 minutes to speak. Well, exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes, period.
All right. Hello, I'm Sophia Garza. I'll get right to it.
Thank you.
I don't understand what it's like to be an officer. I don't understand what it's like to be the spouse, parent, or child of an officer. I can only imagine the struggles they face on the daily. But I do live in a community that has police officers. Myself and everyone around me are affected by how policing is exacted in our community. Do the citizens being policed have no say? We've been told many times that the process of city government is slow, that it takes time, and we understand that. While we would like it to be faster, we understand that's unrealistic, but what we are really asking for is a seat at the table. We want to be a part of that process. We have attempted communications with certain council members outside of the meetings and have been met with little to no response to outright refusal to meet with members of our group. Chief Watts accused us of being individuals with pre-existing political agendas. I disagree. We're citizens participating in our government and trying to make change through the proper channels. Mayor Caldwell, I challenge you to make a seat at a table. Let us be part of the process. Listen to your constituency. We are trying to make a change for the better, and we're trying to do that in a positive way by coming to these city council meetings and participating in local government. There are a lot of other ways that we could go about it, but this is the way that we decided we could make the most change. And I think coming into it, we all had hopes that we would have more listening ears and that we would have more response from city council members, but mostly the mayor. And until we see change in that process, movement in that process, or we get a seat at that table, expect to see us every Tuesday at 6 p.m. on the 3rd floor of the Ogden Municipal Building in the City Council chambers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You know, I appreciate you making this a special city council meeting on my behalf.
Oh, is it your special day?
But anyway, I'm here to represent.
John, you need to tell us your name.
Yes, my name is John Prescott.
Even though we know you, yeah.
just so Richard would know there. But anyway, and this is Vern Burgess. He's my cohort here. But anyway, we're here to remind you of October 10th. And we worked out a schedule to have you practice in the wheelchairs.
Awesome. When is it?
And but anyway, I just want to let you know that I'm excited about this. It's part of the American Disabilities Month, which is in October. So there's a lot of awareness going on in October, which I fully support. And this here is just one of them. And I can see this in the future as an ongoing activity in October. I'm going to turn time over to Vern to make a few comments.
I don't need that.
Oh,
You do kind of.
The recorder will need you to have the microphone for the record, okay?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. We can give you a couple extra seconds here.
I can deal with it. Thank you. I spent the first 70 days of this summer in hospitals, so I'm a little slow in getting back to you folks on this, but we're up against a problem with trying to get gymnasium time because of city recreation. Also, the different schools have got their games and intramural things. We know the story, okay? But I did find one opening, which is Marshall White. I got to hurry. I got 58 seconds. I found Marshall White to be accessible. I went in and looked. Everything's wheelchair accessible, so the roads to Independence can bring some of their people to watch you guys cream us in a game of wheelchair basketball.
I'm sure. Mm-hmm.
It happens to us all the time.
Oh, I'm sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, we don't perform crime. It's a crime how we perform. But we're looking at Marshall White. They want to charge us $30 an hour, which isn't bad. We're looking at like maybe $5.30 to $8 or $9. I've asked them to, I think it'd be a great idea if we were to advertise it well enough so that their people could come from that neighborhood and other neighborhoods, maybe give a donation, and the donation can go to Marshall White for whatever they need, if that meets with you folks. Other schools won't let us, other schools won't let us use the gym to raise money. At any rate, that's in the contract. But we're looking at we're looking at the 10th of October, Marshall White, if that meets with you. Every Tuesday night from 6:30 till 9, we're at Mount Fort Junior High. I bring extra chairs. Come and get used to them. All of them have wheelie bars. I'm done.
Ever get out of here by now?
Sorry, I went over.
That's okay. You had a little maneuvering to do. Thank you.
This is a great opportunity because I've seen it at Hill Air Force Base because I was on the committee that got it going at Hill Air Force Base, and it's been going on and on throughout
Great.
these years.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity.
You did. Thanks, Vern.
John said he was going to let me use his chair for that game, though.
Oh, no. Like the Segway. You like the electronic.
I do.
Yeah.
I've tried it out before. It's pretty nice.
Hi.
Hello, I am Ruby Mercado. It is unfortunate that the family's emotions have been harnessed by a few with a pre-existing political agenda. These are words used by our chief of police, and I wanted to clarify that no one is pulling any strings on myself or my family in any situation. We have simply presented our concerns for the safety of our community that we are clearly a part of. Also, if members of the Ogden Police Department felt as though our concerns for excessive force meant that their lives were unimportant, then I believe that clearly shows there is a problem that needs to be addressed. Again, I mention this for the safety of our community and our officers, and Giovanni's safety should have also been a concern. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Lex Scott. I'm the leader of Black Lives Matter Utah. I came up here to inform you of a situation that has to do with you. I've been working with police and the FBI and the Department of Justice for 6 years. I just went to Washington, D.C., to Quantico, working with the FBI because the FBI prosecutes police brutality. After my visit, I did receive a call from the FBI Civil Rights Division asking me about police relations in this state, seeing if they're doing anything about police reform, excessive force, body cam footage policies, community-controlled civilian review boards, diversity training, de-escalation training, etc. I said that I was very concerned about elected officials and also the police department cooperating with the public. They asked if I would like a full civil rights investigation by the Department of Justice of Utah Police. I said that I did. They are now conducting an investigation. I get nervous. I've never spoke publicly.
I know that's not true.
So what's going to happen is they're going to bring mediators and they're going to have police brutality victims and police and activists meet with the Department of Justice. This also happened in LAPD where they couldn't resolve these issues, so they issued a federal consent decree. Now the police control belongs to a police commission in Los Angeles. They have lost control of their police department because they refuse to cooperate with police reform. The same thing happened in Ferguson, Missouri. You can Google the Department of Justice report on Ferguson PD. So basically, we want excessive force policies, use of force policies rewritten. We want de-escalation training. We want body cam footage to be released within 10 days of every officer involved shooting, unedited with sound. We want officers to not be investigated by themselves. It's a conflict of interest. It's not okay. And I will be meeting with the Department of Justice next month, and I will tell them that the police are not cooperating. And I do want to push for a federal consent decree. So I would like to say that if you have any regulation over police reform, police accountability and transparency, I would get to it because you will lose control of your police department. Have a great day.
Hello, my name is Davis Johnson. I live here in Ogden. My family owns Beehive Self-Storage on Wall Avenue. I'm also concerned about the recent murder of Giovanni Mercado, and so I'm here to talk to you guys again about that. I'd recommend this book really highly, The New Jim Crow. It's a really awesome assembly of very well-known things about statistics in policing and incarceration. And one part that really sticks out, she talks about implicit bias and how even people who don't think that they are biased, people who would answer questions and indicate that they are not biased, when tested, still often have implicit racial bias. We do believe that there was race involved in the officer's decision to shoot Giovanni as opposed to detain him peacefully. And there's this part here about a test where one study involved a video game that placed photographs of white and black individuals holding either a gun or other object, such as a wallet, soda can, or cell phone, into various photographic backgrounds. Participants were told to decide as quickly as possible whether to shoot the target, whether they had a gun or a different object. Consistent with earlier studies, participants were more likely to mistake a black target as armed when he was not, and mistake a white target as unarmed when in fact he was armed. And so this, obviously doesn't apply to just black people and white people, but implicit racial bias can affect Latino people, just people of color in general. And so I would really urge the police department to consider that, and especially when looking at this case where 4 officers who had non-lethal means decided that it was just not worth their time to detain him without murdering him. And so it makes our whole community feel less safe. I literally didn't know Giovanni before this. I had no connection to the family or anything, and just seeing the news story was very disturbing to me. It's very close to home, and it's not the first time I've heard of police brutality in Utah, and so this is very alarming. I have no prior connection to the family, so I wanted to come speak again and urge you all to read this book. Just for the record, The New Jim Crow, and that part about the video game was on page 106. The chapter is The Color of Justice, and I'd really encourage you to read this. And there's lots of other research. This is kind of just an assembly of it all. These kind of people have known like these kind of discrepancies in policing, in the decisions to use excessive force, and also in higher sentencing for people of color. There's a lot of great research about that stuff. So I just encourage you to look into it. The reason that this is concerning to all of us is because we recognize a larger pattern, and we're not trying to twist it into something that it's not for political reasons. This is just alarming to be part of a community where police wouldn't be listening to the community after something like this. So that's all that we want, is to be heard as a community. So justice for Giovanni. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Daly, and I'm just going to have a little continuation of the last time we talked, and just encourage you to reach out to your community and not be what seems to be a little one-sided with the police force. I'm a middle child. I spent my life like getting people to talk to each other, and that's kind of what I see your role between the police force and our community. So I'd really like to see you try to reach out and create that dialogue, because it's so important. We have so much to learn on both sides. I know it sounds like we're just trying to tell you what to do, but we want to learn about the police force. We want to learn what their issues are and how we can help them to better police our community. I think the shooting with Giovanni was unnecessary, but tell me why it wasn't. Tell me what was going on and why that needed to happen. And I think with that kind of dialogue, we can all learn so much and learn from each other. Ogden is such a diverse community, and it is so wonderful. I actually live in Salt Lake, but I love Ogden for the fact that the diversity here it has such a rich history, and you really need to learn about it and embrace it, and it can just make it better for everybody. So I strongly encourage that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nazli Gonzalez. I want to push for police reform. If you aren't aware, Ogden Police Department has lost 28 officers to Salt Lake City Department in the past 3 years. And this is according to, former police captain of Ogden City Police Department. Not only does this hurt Ogden and their task force, but it also makes you question if they're losing that many officers and they're understaffed, what's the quality of the officers that they have now? Ogden City Police Department, I feel like, needs to make some changes to their police task force and maybe offer better pay so that they're not losing so many officers per year or throughout the years, because losing 1, 2, 3 officers is
hurts their department, but losing 28 in the past 3 years to other departments, they're not just leaving for pay, but they're leaving for other reasons as well. And I think it just shows we lost 28 officers in the past 3 years. And then that was Officer Captain Daniel Croyle, if you guys want to look that up. And I think it's a strain on smaller departments as they struggle to insensitize officers and are left with the burden of training new officers and have a less experienced task force. So I think that's something that we also gotta look up on and do more research on, as well as moving with police reform. What kind of officers do we have in our department? If they're getting a certain amount of training per year or whatever the case may be, how many hours apply to which categories of that training? And I just think, we need to push for police reform, and having a board would help that, so that we're able to speak out, we're able to be a part of the community and have relations with officers and feel like we understand where they're coming from. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
There's one more. Got my wife on it.
This lady's moving too, so I don't know. Yeah, she might be. One more lady too. Maybe.
First of all, respect to the family and board too, and council too. Ralph Price, 636 6th Street. I just want to say one thing on the situation of I've seen this movement both ways as far as the honorable way the family has been presenting an issue here and asking for this board and stuff like this. Your receptivity is to be commended, that we have this decorum and that we can speak out like this. And I'd like to see that. I'm going to, as I said, respect the family, but I'm going to go to a different area, and that being the diversity board. I just would like to see more from the mayor's office, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Caldwell. I'd like to see you be able to use them a little bit more outside the box to have community relations with the minority community. I hear a lot of things that are on the agenda, are things that about like it's a working department with inside the mayor's office. I'd like to see that it is a independent board and that it's an independent committee trying to bridge a gap with the mayor's office, with city council, with the counties. And that's that they are trying to be more on an educative thing so we can see more minorities here involved and interested in the arts, interested in government, interested in the programs and the different things that are available here. Also, I think you would learn that there is a lot more to the minority communities than what is being perceived at this point in time. The avenues that are being used are traditional. And in that doing so, you're trying to go ahead and make movement with inside the minority community, the channels that are already there. It hasn't worked. That's why we have the diversity board came into existence. I'd like to see them have a little more leeway with inside your office so that they can get out there and they can do more things. That budget should be gone. They should be asking for more. She's not asking, I'm asking. More money for the diversity board to be out there and be able to be proactive and bring them up to awareness and up to consciousness so that they might be here and be able to be part of Ogden City again. I know my mother was the first black school teacher for the state of Utah. I grew up with Ruby Price. I know what it is to see that thing being done, and we can do it better. It's commended that what efforts we are putting that forth, and that we do have the board in existence. I'd like to see more money there so they can think outside the box and go ahead. I'd like to see more freedom from the mayor's office, Mr. Johnson, you guys, to empower them to be able to do more. And Marshall White, they're going to bring it up again. Marshall White Center could really be used. And yeah. Also, I just want to extend an invitation. You don't have to wait till October 10th. You can go out with me tonight and everything. I'll show you some homeless people coming out of prison, jail, university. I do it every day and night. Anytime, you guys. You can go on now. I'm not playing a basketball game, though.
I hope you're there to watch. You can cheer on.
I've been there. Now, you can come have your turn, too.
Yes, please.
Vice Chair Jaberka, I'd suggest that this might be the last person before we.
Yeah, and then we can recess if
Thank
there's
you.
any others.
Good evening. My name is Sandy Neild, and I live at 4367 Bob White Court in Ogden. And I was here a year ago after Planning and Zoning had, after Utah or Ogden had decided to do cover all of the entire city of Ogden with an ADU, which I thought was absolutely wrong. There are places in Ogden that should not be ADU. And we went through all the steps that we were told to go through last year. And when it came to the city council decided not to make a decision and stick with just nothing. Just basically, there hasn't been a city plan for Southeast Ogden in some 37 years. And so it was time to do one. So I myself was on 2 committees for Southeast Ogden. And after we met, and I was on transportation and housing, and after we met and it was over with, we had a meeting with the community, and I was happy to see the turnout. But I got the feeling that we did all of this for nothing, quite honestly, that we feel very strongly about our neighborhood, and that there are some neighborhoods that ADU just simply does not belong. And after we went through all this, I was set in on a working session I came away with the feeling that, we've done all this, and this is what they want, and it still comes down to 50%. 50% of what people feel in some areas, not 50% of what my neighborhood feels. My neighborhood is 100% against the ADUs. Now, I understand Ogden has got a real problem with the shortage of housing. You should take these guys up on building multi-unit family living situations in downtown Ogden. With the bus situation that you're bringing in, that's perfect for multi-family situations, I feel. I do want to say thank you to our police officers in Ogden. I can't imagine what it would be like to have a job with a target on your back 24/7. And I do have one other problem, and that is on the Planning and Zoning Commission, there's a person on this commission that is also running for mayor. I feel that is a conflict of interest at the highest level. Not only is she running for mayor, but she's also trying to set up an ADU in her own backyard by building an additional house on her property, which I can't imagine that you can do that, although I was told that was incorrect. You can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you want to hear more about those ADUs, you can stick around for the next part of our meeting.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there, if there's anybody else that has public comment?
I have to listen to my granddaughter's book report. So when is that park?
It's
Right now.
Right now. Yeah. But you can also watch it on the stream, I believe, too.
Thank you.
Great. So
take an hour.
did somebody say they did have an additional public comment? Yeah, we're going to recess if that's okay, this part of the meeting, and we'll go to the fact-finding work session if that works for everybody.
Vice Chair, you ought to mention that it'll be an hour, so if she can wait an hour, then that's good. But that's how long it's going to take.
Well, she wants to be here for
She wants to be here for part of the discussion. She
Vice
doesn't
Chair?
have another comment, yeah.
So are we skipping our comments also after public comment?
I think so, because we're going to go to the
We are?
fact-finding.
Okay.
Unless you would like to make a motion otherwise.
Well, I don't want to make a motion. I just want to make a comment. But if I can't make a comment without making a motion, then I'll make a motion.
Go for it.
I just want to say that after hearing public comment, every meeting that I've been here since I've been on the council, we respond to the mayor and us respond to the comments, and I don't know why we're skipping that.
That's all.
Because someone else has another comment. There's
We're
people
not
that still
done.
have comment.
Oh, we're not
after
done?
the recess.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All
I
right.
apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
I really appreciate all the public engagement.
I thought we were
so-
closing down the public comment and not coming
No,
back
we're just
to,
recessing right now, and we'll come back to it at the end. Okay? Great. Okay, so we'll move on to that. And so we're going to talk about different suggestions and recommendations from the constituents. And I believe our staff is Glenn coming over, or Janine. Somebody's coming over to do that. I'm like, who's that? Oh, another. Oh, gonna go. Everybody's going to present. First of all, while you guys are setting up, I just want to extend my appreciation to the council staff for really delving into this housing topic for us and building out this schedule of special fact-finding work sessions, and then also actually creating the whole presentation tonight. I really appreciate all of your efforts.
Okay, well, thank you. As you mentioned, it's just us tonight, so just council staff. So I'll just do a quick run through of what we're going to talk about. So, as you mentioned, you've gotten some suggestions from some constituents, and we thought this would be a good time to talk about some of those things, to go into a little bit more depth. So I'll be talking about the inclusionary zoning. Amy will be talking about tiny houses and ADUs. And then Janine will bat third, and she'll talk about some of the things that the other communities are doing, and whether or not to continue to accelerate the current policies or programs, or to do something else with them. So I'll go ahead and jump in with the inclusionary zoning part, unless you want me to hang on for a minute while people settle down, whichever one you want. All right, looks like we're all right. So I'll go ahead and jump in. So as I mentioned, you do hear this term a lot, this inclusionary zoning, and we wanted to provide a little bit more detail on what that was, what it does, where it happens, all the things that go along with that. So sort of a basic definition of inclusionary zoning is that it is a land use tool, so it is in a zoning ordinance, and it's something for the inclusion of below market rate units within a market rate housing project that are designed for low and moderate income individuals. So as the name might imply, inclusionary zoning is largely a response to exclusionary zoning, which is generally the practice of implementing something in your zoning ordinance, large lots, for example, or maybe higher design standards, something that's going to separate that area economically from other areas, right? So only certain people can afford to live in that area based on those zoning requirements. So inclusionary zoning started in the early 70s as a response to that. It's important to note that inclusionary zoning is generally part of larger inclusionary housing policies. So those two terms sometimes get interchanged, but inclusionary zoning is different than inclusionary housing, which might include other policies, not necessarily in the zoning ordinance. So sort of as I mentioned, the intent then is to require or encourage development of affordable units within the new market rate developments to increase the availability of and access to affordable units in, and this is an important part of this, in a mixed income environment. So that's also why the name inclusionary zoning is there. So some of the basics, and I'll touch on more of these as I go, but these IZ policies can be mandatory or voluntary. Depending on whether they're mandatory or voluntary, there may or may not be incentives that go along with that. There may be a requirement to actually build the units into the new development, or there may be a fee in lieu payment option, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. The policy that you set or that the municipality sets will generally have a standard for either the number of units or the percentage of the development that has to meet a certain AMI category. So there may be a requirement of 10 or 15% that have to meet 50 to 80% AMI standard, maybe below 50. Sometimes it's 80 to 100%. It just depends on how the policy is written. And then the affordability is typically maintained either in perpetuity or for a set period of time. This can be done through deed restriction or through ordinance. So it may be that a deed restriction is in place for 10 or 20 or 40 years, or it may never go away, just depending on how the policy is written. So if we start with this mandatory inclusionary zoning concept, this, as the term implies, it requires the inclusion of a certain number or percentage of these below market rate units into any new development that happens. So there are a couple of triggers that this might come into play with. So either with a rezone application, if a developer wants to come in, something like you just saw a few minutes ago, and says, I want to do something, I want to do this multifamily housing development. There may be the IZ policies that kick in at that point. If the zoning is already in place, it can just be applied to an area. So any new development, even under the current zoning, would have to comply with those inclusionary zoning standards. As I mentioned, the number of units and the price and the rent generally set based on the policies adopted by the city. And also, as I mentioned, as I will talk about more in a little bit, there may be this option to pay a fee in lieu of building the actual units. And then that fee in lieu payment would then be collected and then used to build the units elsewhere or otherwise administer some sort of a housing program. So the voluntary inclusionary zoning policies are a little bit different because they're not mandatory. And so in these, there's got to be some sort of an incentive or a bonus. So these act more like an incentive zone. If you think about like the 12th Street overlay zone, for example, if a developer includes these units, then there are some offsets or some incentives for that developer. And it does help to offset the cost of these below market rate units. So here are some of the common incentives. So maybe increased density, building height, floor area ratio, maybe it's a reduction in parking requirements, or maybe reduced fees or some sort of an expedited approval process, or maybe some sort of a tax increment or a subsidy. So where these exist, they're not uncommon. So we've talked recently about some policies that are a little bit less known, like the formula-based business ordinance. These are more known because they've been around for a while, and a lot of communities have these. So just a couple of years ago, based on the most recent studies, I was able to find just under about 900 jurisdictions in the country in 25 states, plus the District of Columbia, have some form of inclusionary zoning policy. The majority of those policies, though, are in one of three states. So Massachusetts, New Jersey, and California all have state-level requirements for affordable housing, and they do include these inclusionary zoning requirements. So the majority of the policies are in those three states, and because they have state-level requirements, the majority of the IZ policies are considered to be mandatory. So also based on how land use law works, there are some states that just flat out prohibit the use of these kinds of policies. So Oregon is a recent example. They just changed their state level policy. So you think of Oregon as progressive as they are with land use. For a very long time, they did not allow cities to participate or to write these inclusionary zoning policies. So just in 2016, so just a few years ago, they changed that. We do have one here in the state, in Park City, and that is in place largely to address affordability in general, but workforce housing specifically. So that's kind of a broad overview. If you kind of draw on the conversation you all had in the work session earlier tonight, when it comes to development, there's a lot of economic factors that go into this. So it's important that we talk about some of those economic factors when we talk about inclusionary zoning, so you get a fuller picture of what they do. So this is one thing that we hear a lot of, is that inclusionary zoning is a really easy way for the community to get these affordable housing units with little or no public investment. But it's important to remember that these units are below market rate. And so because they're below market rate, these units aren't paying for themselves in the same way that a market rate unit would, either through a purchase price or through rental rates. So it's important to understand how these units are then paid for. So in a voluntary system, these incentives are designed to make up the difference and allow these costs to be either cut, so it's maybe parking reductions or fee reductions or something like that, or additional market rates can be built to help offset that cost. In the mandatory requirements, some of the way these work is if it's mandatory, that means all of the developers have to deal with it. They've all got to build it into their pro formas. One developer can't have an advantage because he or she is developing without these policies, and another one is, and so there's some negotiation that might happen, and that might make it a little bit more difficult for one developer over another. If it's mandatory, they've all got to deal with it, right? They've all got to build that into their model. They've all got to address it. So as I mentioned, sometimes that does eliminate the need for the negotiation, largely because the policies generally are more clear, more straightforward. If you build this many units, you've got to provide this many affordable housing units. It's not much of a negotiation there. And then also, as you heard in your work session earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty in development. So if these requirements are known up front, that can help reduce some of the uncertainty. But it's also important to remember that without these offsets, developers and a lot of times ultimately the buyers and the renters pay the cost of these below market rate units. And like with most public policies, sometimes there are unintended consequences. You know, given the best of our intentions, sometimes other things still happen that we didn't count on or that we may have to address separately. Going through some of the research, this is kind of one of the big unintended consequences that people talk about. And it's that these policies may actually make housing prices go up. And it's sort of counterintuitive in some ways. But if these incentives don't offset these costs, the market rate units may have to be priced a little bit higher to make up the difference. That can increase then affordability overall. But since there is a limit on what the market can bear, a developer may not be able to raise the price of those units to a point where the market can still bear to make those numbers work, and they may just simply choose not to build, right? They may go somewhere else, they may do something else. That's going to reduce the supply, since those even market rate units would have otherwise been built. So we may have a supply decrease if they're too problematic. Likewise, if they're geographically targeted, if it's just a downtown, for example, a developer may look at that and say, I don't want to do this. I want to go somewhere else where these IZ policies don't exist. And so that may push development out into other areas, and that may reduce the supply in that area if you're targeting an area.
Would you prefer to wait till the end for questions, or?
No, you can go ahead and ask questions.
I'm sure whatever questions we ask, you have the answer somewhere later in your presentation.
Sure.
I was just thinking about it because I know just a little bit about Park City's, several of the different things that they've done. And I know that they did some studies and looked at some of the economics around some of these things and chose particular kinds of places, obviously, but then also certain sectors that would help to think about this kind of inclusionary zoning. So, I would assume that we would need to kind of dig even deeper into some of those kinds of things, which are totally out of the scope of anybody in the council, to figure out, because of some of these more complicated issues.
Right, and I will talk about that just a little bit.
Great, no, thank
more.
you. I'm sure you probably would.
So one of the other thoughts that came out of this, or one of the other unintended consequences, is that these policies don't actually help the lowest income residents. Again, because this is largely an economic issue and we're dealing with real developers and real money, most of the policies are generally targeted to this 50 to 80% or 80 to 100 or maybe even 120% AMI. And so even with some vouchers and other offsets, a developer still may not be able to make it pencil if he or she has to provide units that are at this below 50% threshold. So there again, they may shy away from that. There may be a segment that's helped, but that lowest end still may not be helped with these policies. So back to this fee in lieu concept. So as I mentioned, some of the programs allow a residential developer to simply pay a fee rather than building the units. Some of the programs out there, and Park City is a little bit like this, they do exact a fee from a commercial developer to help provide for the workforce housing. So if you're bringing in a big employer that doesn't pay particularly high, you might be contributing to the affordable housing problem, or not paying very much, and so there may be an exaction that to help offset that or to help deal with that. And then this fee in lieu payment then allows the city to accumulate that funding and either develop a singular affordable housing project, something that's independent that the city builds, or help with a program that's otherwise designed to help. So some of the benefits and drawbacks. This is kind of high level, but Some basics here. Obviously, if the city builds a project that's an affordable housing project, the city's going to have much more control over what happens and where it is and what it looks like. There's a larger pool of money that they can work with. And again, back to the developers and some of the economics there. If it's simply a fee, they know how much it is. They come to the city and find out everything they need to do. And if it's X amount of dollars that they need to pay to deal with this, they'll put that right into their pro forma, and that's just part of their development. So it's an upfront cost that they would know. Some of the drawbacks, of course, and these drawbacks really go to the point of these inclusionary zoning ordinances. So if the city takes that money and builds something somewhere else, those housing units aren't necessarily going to be integrated into something with mixed income. So those residents may not have access to the same schools, parks, amenities, everything else that they might otherwise have access to in a mixed income housing project. And then in some cases, it's more work for the city. If we can get a developer to do it, put those in, implement that, that's something that the city doesn't necessarily have to build or administer. Ogden City is a little bit different than most cities. I mean, we're still the biggest home builder in the city. So we as a city, we know how to build stuff, right? Most cities don't build things other than an occasional city hall or a public works facility or something. Most cities don't know how to build buildings the way that we do. So we'd be in a bit of a different position than a lot of cities. So some of the big questions then, do these policies really work? And in going through a lot of these studies, the results are really mixed as to whether they work the way that they're intended to. As I mentioned with the housing prices, some of the studies show that there isn't an increase in housing prices, but others that are tailored to a specific location, particularly in California, those studies tended to show that it did have an impact on housing prices. It did actually raise the housing prices. One thing to mention is even though these policies have been around for a long time, there really aren't that many in-depth studies of how well these work. There are sort of some high-level broad studies, and there are some really individualized studies like these ones in California, but it's hard to say. It's hard to say whether they work or not because there's not a lot of research into how well they're actually working. As it says here, some studies show that the number of units created with these policies is really too few to have much of an impact. But the other studies do, of course, show that those people who are the beneficiaries of these policies do see an improvement in their status. So the best answer we have is it depends.
Come on. You're supposed to have them.
That's right. So there are obviously a lot of factors that we've talked about in giving that answer. It depends. Obviously, the local market, the way that the ordinance is crafted, the economics of the area. So where do they seem to work the best? The voluntary policies seem to work a little bit better when the economics are favoring the developer or development in general. So stronger markets, higher land values, increasing housing prices, that helps to absorb some of that cost and develop with some of those incentives. The second point is really important when it comes to the voluntary policies. So the low base zoning is important for making the incentives attractive to a developer. And what that means is that the underlying zoning has to be such that an incentive for an extra couple of floors, for example, some additional height, some reduced parking, is different enough than what they can do as a by right use that is something that is enticing, is something that is a consideration. This is the Boston example that they talk about in a lot of the research. So what they say is a lot of the base zoning for much of the Boston area has a limit of 3 stories on their buildings. So if you have a strong market, right, with a housing need and most of the base zoning is 3 stories, if a developer gets another story or 2, that's a pretty big deal because that base zoning really limits what they can do. So it's important that base zoning makes those incentives attractive.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If you have a voluntary program and you give a developer incentives and he takes advantage of those,
mm-hmm.
What keeps those inclusionary zones alive over time?
Right, and that's the control that you would put in place with either deed restrictions or rental rates that are fixed for a certain period of time. Sometimes they're a percentage, so you can only get so much of a percentage of profit year over year when you go to sell that unit, so it's restricted. And so that's generally the best way that these policies have to restrict that. To your example, you can't just build an affordable housing unit or one that meets this AMI criteria, sell it to somebody who meets the standard. A year later, they turn around and sell it for a market rate. Right? That's not going to work. So there's got to be some restriction in place or some control.
So polices it, I guess maybe that's...
Yeah.
Does the city continue to police it?
What's that?
Does the city continue to police that?
Based on what I've seen, some cities do. Others will deal with the housing authority or some other nonprofit to help deal with that. So people who might be looking for housing anyway, they would connect those resources, and then that organization would then deal with those.
So in our case, it would be Ogden Housing Authority that would kind of have an inventory of those. And okay, all right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do they have to stay in the property a certain amount of time before they can sell that out?
I didn't see anything specifically, but I also didn't see anything. So there might be something out there that would require somebody to be in a unit for a certain period of time. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how all of them work.
Because we do have some restrictions on our housing that we do here.
There are some, yeah. So the mandatory requirements, this is sort of the Manhattan model. So Manhattan started with a voluntary program, and this kind of gets to that base zoning, right? So if you look at what a developer can already do in Manhattan, it's already very intense development. They can already build high buildings that are 0 lot lines, high floor area ratio buildings. So giving them incentives, an extra floor or two or whatever the incentive was, really wasn't that enticing. They could probably do it anyway. So that didn't really work when they first rolled out their IZ policy as a voluntary policy. They changed to a mandatory policy, got a much better response, right? It's still a big enough geographic area that development isn't going to be pushed to another area. If you want to develop in Manhattan, you want to develop in Manhattan. So that's where people are going to go.
We're not quite there yet.
Right. Definitely not.
I'm close.
But that's just an example of how the voluntary version really didn't get a lot of traction, but the mandatory program did because of some of those underlying factors. As I mentioned, these policies really need to be clear and easily understood, and they need to be very market specific. So even though Park City has one, there's no way we could take that policy and apply it here. We just don't have the same conditions as Park City does. So they've got to be crafted with local conditions in mind. So some higher level considerations. What's the need? What's the goal? Is a voluntary approach right? Is a mandatory approach right? Is it a specific area? Is it citywide? To your question, Council Member, how is affordability maintained? How is the program administered? And what are those right incentives to entice the developer to participate? When we get to Ogden a little bit more specifically, some questions for us is our market strong enough to have a voluntary policy, right? Would our current zoning allow for adequate incentives? So it was mentioned earlier tonight, our CBD doesn't have a height restriction. So if a developer can already build a 5-story building, but they come in with a proposal for a 3-story building and we say, well, we'll give you another 2 stories, they'll say, I can already do 2 stories. So the underlying zoning is important. So we would have to take a look at that and make sure that our zoning would allow for something voluntary. So could we mandate a policy? Could it be mandatory? As you know, we subsidize, again, with the development or the conversation earlier today, we subsidize much of the development. So if we require something, would we ourselves just end up paying for it in the end? Would it be easier for us to essentially take that fee in lieu payment that we would require and just take that money rather than going through a circular process and just take that money and build affordable housing ourselves? How many units are we anticipating over the next 10 to 20 years? How many of those units could be included in a policy like this? And as you've seen over all of these meetings and over the years that you've been on the council, Our CED folks do an absolutely amazing job of getting development here. But the question would be, is a policy like this enough to push that away? Is our market strong enough to be able to bear something like that? Or is it still fragile enough that something like that may just push a developer away? That's something that they couldn't do. Are they going to be pushed to, outside Weber County? Are they going to be pushed to Falcon Hill, Farmington, Salt Lake, whatever? So those are all things that we would need to look at if you were to consider a policy like this. So with that, if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those to the best of my ability. If not, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Any questions or comments?
Very informative. Lots to think about.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to go through a little bit. I know there's been some inquiries about tiny houses in Ogden. So just a little bit of context on that item. And I have to say our city planner, Greg Montgomery's done some really nice research that I was able to pull into this. So thanks, Greg. Just as background on tiny houses. So it's really interesting because the definition, so when you say tiny home or tiny house, people think of different things a lot of times. So they can vary. The designs can range from stationary to mobile. And then also another important point to make is that Ogden Code currently allows tiny houses, except within the East Central area. And so long as those are permanently installed, there's utility connections and they comply with our code. So,
and there's a square footage requirement also.
Yes, but most tiny homes are 400 square feet or less, and there is some allowance in the ordinance for that.
Or more?
Huh?
You mean or more?
Or less.
Or less.
Or less for tiny homes.
I thought we had a 400-foot minimum square foot for a dwelling unit.
Greg, if you don't mind.
Whoever's got the answer, that's how I want to know.
Yeah, I don't know the exact, but tiny homes are 400 or less.
So what Amy's talking about is with the state building code and how they define that number. Zoning-wise, what you're referring to is if it's an ADU. But if it's a standalone single-family home on a lot, we don't have a minimum except in the East Central.
There is no minimum. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, then I'm enlightened then. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. And Greg, that's a really important clarification. So that's another thing too, is tiny homes are not always ADUs. They can be ADUs, but they are not always ADUs. And I'll kind of go through that.
Like that one that's just by itself.
Yes. And there's a lot by themselves, and you'll see.
No, I mean, but like just by itself on one lot.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
So with tiny houses, really, if this is something you'd like to pursue, a purpose for them needs to be defined. So this goes into the question that just came up. So whether you're looking to establish more permanent residences, further access to low-income housing, looking at housing the homeless. I know that there's been a proposal before you that maybe you could use tiny homes to help with that. Transitional housing or ADUs. There you go. So it's really interesting in researching this because the costs with tiny homes range substantially, and it's really fascinating as well because some of the things I actually emailed over Glenn this thing I saw on Facebook, and it was in Weber County. Somebody was trying to sell a tiny home, and they're just like, I've got it on a trailer ready to go. Anybody, and it was just like, whoa, somebody selling a house on a trailer on Facebook. It's kind of scary. So the costs really can range, and some people try to do them themselves without necessarily following code. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic with that. But I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, they're really, really inexpensive. But then you pull in utility connections and foundation costs, and then suddenly you add thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, and then, land. So that's an additional element that I don't even know how you price without knowing exactly where the home is going. So there's a lot of complexities built into that. And on my last slide, I have a picture. So when I went to the League conference, I did the tiny home tour. And it was really quick. It was a really short tour. We took the train, we walked over, and 10 seconds later it was over. But
was it just one tiny home?
It was one tiny home.
Okay.
They have it over at City Creek, and you can go and quickly tour it.
So
but
utility connections, they're traditional utility connections, like any house
So-
would have?
currently with our code, yes, that's what our code requires at this point with tiny homes. So they'd have to have traditional utility connections and a foundation.
Okay.
So that's something that you all could look at changing if you so desired. But right now, that's the reality of our code that we work within. So they were saying the tiny home that's in City Creek, and I have a picture of it at the very end of my presentation, the company goes in and they actually acquire the land. They take care of the utility connections. They start at about $120,000. So that kind of gives you an idea of maybe where some of those can be, and that's a one bedroom, very compacted home.
Do we have any in Ogden that have built this to our standard? No.
Not
legally.
Well,
we know about.
Well, I know there's some pretty small homes, but nothing that meets the definition of tiny home. 400 or less, or right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, we'd have to look at it, but I think that there are some really small homes that could perhaps. I'm not sure. So.
Well, I know some small homes, but I don't know if they meet that. You know, they do have individual rooms and things like. They don't look like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, in this, I've tried to find a lot of different types of examples, so you can kind of get a plethora of ideas as to what tiny homes could be. So there's a lot of opportunities with tiny homes. So affordability is one of them, because they have less materials, there's less space to warm and cool, better for the environment, really can be quickly constructed. Increased density, so you can have more housing, lower maintenance costs, but there are, in reading some of the materials questions about that, I'll go into on the next slide, but an off-the-grid lifestyle, if your code allows that. Allowing for additional outdoor space, so if somebody's really into the outdoors, they could build a tiny home and really kind of have a nice yard space with that, and then possibly mobile depending on your code.
On our codes, we set how many units to be placed on a plot of ground. Have we set that for tiny homes at all? Or
So right now, it would just fall within whatever the existing allowance is in a different zone. So there's no specific, but yeah.
So if we looked at tiny homes, we'd have to go through and review that then.
If you wanted to make some changes, that would definitely be an option.
Yeah.
So then with tiny homes, there's definitely some opportunities, but also some challenges. So some of the things that I read, relate to safety, building codes, HUD standards, and that kind of goes to the tiny home that I saw for sale on Facebook. They said it's not quite done, but you could go to the Home Depot, load up on some materials, and really make it nice for you. So longevity is also a question because it's a smaller investment. Are people actually going to stay in them longer, or if they break down, kind of move on to something else? Land ownership is a big question as well, because a lot of times with real estate, what's going up is the price of the land, not necessarily the structure on the land. So, and that kind of goes into the home equity, product demand and resale. It may ebb and flow. And then another thing that was interesting that came up in my research was family size. So if a large family tried to fit into a tiny home, that may actually be fire safety issues associated with that.
I didn't know we had a requirement for space per person.
And there's not a requirement. There's not. It's not necessarily based on requirements, but it's just a safety issue.
Okay, it's just a consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly. So if you have a family of 6 staying in a 1-bedroom tiny home,
okay,
there's some type of incident. There could be
Our
an
family
issue.
felt like that for a little while.
Well, and I think, for many circumstances, many generations. That's been a norm. So it's not discouraged in the code, but maybe not. So considerations before you that you all have options and choices with regards to tiny homes, looking at the zoning designations, looking at the current definitions, whether or not you'd like to change the utility and foundation requirements that currently exist, that we would require a stationary home, not a mobile one. And then if there's specific design guidelines. So you'll notice some of the quality of the tiny home community photos that I included vary. So something to think about, to Councilmember Stevens' point, subdividing land, and then the ADU question as well.
Kind of reminds me of the chicken coop issues. Like, some people think of the chicken coop as a certain type, and then others have a whole other definition.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really an interesting topic, because even if you Google it, you get so many different people talking about different things. And that's one of the things that I think when you have discussions regarding tiny houses, you need to make sure you're on the same page. So you need to make sure you're talking about a specific thing, like if you're
definitions.
Exactly. Be very definitive as to what you're discussing. So with that, this is the tiny home in Salt Lake. My reflection is probably in the the window, but I don't know if there's any questions. So I wasn't able to get any great pictures in there because our mobile tour all went in, and there were no great pictures to share after, but I did get the outside picture. So I don't know if there's.
You can look at this company online, right? There's a couple of
Yes, and I did get their card. Yeah, if there's any interest in information regarding.
There's actually a local company that's making these too, so I won't advertise.
They have a nice deck there.
City Council.
Yeah.
I have a couple of nephews who make these down in Utah County. They haven't made a lot, but they've made a few, and they wouldn't meet our standard. They're more of a mobile home type of a thing that looks like a tiny home.
Wondering.
Yeah, and they set them up on cinder blocks and, at grade, and use a corrugated hose to, and I can't see those things working in the winter around here. The water line would freeze, and
right, and that's part of why the existing code has those required utility connections.
And they're they do bring them in on a trailer, and they stay on the trailer when they're in the spot. So I don't know. That's the way they've done it. That's when we spoke with the lady that was here to talk about that a lot. That was kind of what she indicated, that is the general rule. So nothing that anybody's ever talked to me about meet our permanent foundation, sewer, utility hookups like we would expect. That's why I asked if there was any in Ogden.
But I think the other man that came with her later was doing more like this kind that has a foundation. But before that, she had the trailer in her backyard,
Right.
And it really is, I think, weighing kind of what you all want in the community. So Washington County is actually they're starting to try to allow some of the trailer type things for retirees and that. And so it just kind of depends on the community culture and climate you're trying to establish. And really, if you want to encourage these, defining a specific purpose as to why you want to encourage those, and then maybe some design guidelines associated with those, just so that for sure kind of what it's accomplishing, and you don't run into what you don't want to accomplish. And
when you say Washington County is starting to allow them, where are they allowing them at?
So it's unincorporated Washington County. So they are putting together kind of I wouldn't call it like a park, but an area where people can go down and bring their tiny homes.
Okay.
But once again, different climate. So, freezing water pipes is a little different down in St. George area than.
I think it also can be seen as a way to make a little extra income too, whether, it's on your property and then you can rent it out to other people or.
Yeah.
And so it is a way to kind of boost your own income for your, kind of like an ADU kind of style too. So thinking about how we can help people to, boost their income.
I think that is the definition of an ADU.
Right. But I'm just saying in that
long as
definition.
the owner lives in the other house.
Yeah, but you're talking $50,000 to start making. If you're going to build one, you've got to put up quite a bit of money.
Yeah,
to
investment.
make one.
Sounds
Just
like
like you would to finish your basement or something, to have a mother-in-law home or something like that. I mean,
I
it
don't know
costs a
about
certain amount of
that.
money.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
I mean, I don't know if it's $50,000.
sounds like if it's on a trailer or mobile wheels, it's more like a mobile home, but downsized.
Was this one by itself? There wasn't others around
Yep,
this one?
there's just one. It's in City Creek, so you can kind of see City Creek behind it. So it's not, this is just an example.
Okay.
They brought it in there for people to come and look and potentially build with the
You
company.
can't tell how much it goes off of the frame.
Yeah.
It doesn't a lot. You see the window right there? That's the bedroom. The bedroom, one single.
Bedroom slash kitchen slash.
No, bedroom slash laundry. So,
Shower.
but I mean, it's impressive, like how they get the fridge in there. I mean, it's
a whole
impressive.
show. It's very fascinating.
Yes,
Anyhow.
definitely.
What's that square footage, do you know?
So that one I think was 320.
320,000.
No, 320.
I was going to say that's quite an expensive home.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
oh, you're very welcome.
Very
Kind of a fun
entertaining.
topic to research. So thank you.
Well, he's getting that pulled up. So I think, like Glenn mentioned, that a lot of the things that I looked at in terms of what other jurisdictions are doing are all very tailored to the individual communities. I mean, there's probably as many different options as there are communities. So I'm just going to review just a few of some other options that I found in other jurisdictions. So this is Teton County, Wyoming. This is where Jackson Hole is. And I just happened to pick this because I heard an article on NPR, and they were talking about the lottery that they have up there for homes that the county owns and how people could qualify for these lotteries. And they were interviewing some of their one of their public safety officers. I think he was like the sheriff of the county, said that he'd never been able to afford a home in Teton County, and that the county had set a goal of having at least 65% of their workforce living in the county. Right now they're at, I think, about 47%. But they have affordable program, which is rental and ownership, but they serve households that earn up to 120% of AMI or MFI. And then they have workforce programs. So if you qualify for that, if you're one of the workforce, if police, fire, teachers, public servants in any way, you could qualify for actual homes for purchase. One thing I did find as I was looking at a lot of these really highly subsidized programs are usually at the county level, so that they can be spread across the county.
Janine, before you leave there, the goal of 65% of workforce, what does that equate to for population? Do you have any idea?
I don't.
Well, the population probably changes so much with the tourism, right? I mean, I would guess.
Yeah. I don't know what that is and how they calculated it.
Yeah,
I just said that was the
I
goal.
wonder how close that is. I mean, it's...
And I'm happy to do that calculation at some point, but
Yeah,
do it right now
I
in your
just don't
head.
know if you knew. I visited up there, and you see lots and lots of big, really expensive houses. And I don't see a ton of smaller ones.
Smaller
so.
homes, right.
And I just wonder what that would mean to us. That's why I was trying to ask, is what would that mean for Ogden if we had
23,000.
Our workforce? That's
23,000 in Teton County.
In Teton County?
Residents.
So 40%, 50%.
But I think they're talking about
that's the total population, though. So that's not workforce.
That's not workforce.
Yeah.
Because they might all be living somewhere else, and that's the whole point.
There's 23,000.
So this one I thought was really interesting. It just popped out at me. Paducah, Kentucky. I've actually been to Paducah, Kentucky twice. It's where the National Quilt Museum is.
Nice.
But they just decided in the late 1990s, 2000, that they needed some help, and they decided they wanted to make themselves into an artist community. So that's what they've done. They've set up artist relocation programs, so they will pay artists to come there. They'll pay for their give them grants to purchase property. Yeah, you're gonna check it out. So then that's for if they want to build homes or live workspaces. They give them business coaching, and they promise new exhibition venues. So I was just there within the last couple of years, and I could see something was happening, but they definitely still have a long way to go. It's pretty rural and sprawl. They've got a railroad that kind of cuts the town in half. But I just thought that was an interesting thing that they decided, okay, this is what we're going to be, and so they're just working towards that goal. Actually, Salt Lake City has been doing a lot in this area, and they just recently in 2018 adopted what they call the Growing SLC. It's a 5-year housing plan that they had help with from an outside contractor develop, and they set 3 goals. One was just for multiple housing options, and then affordable options, and then equitable and fair housing, so more towards the lower. And I just picked a few of sort of the things that they're trying to accomplish with their plan. And so one of those was just modify land use and zoning. I mean, this is one thing that we told you from the very beginning. It's within your power and control. And it's one thing that you can definitely look at. Removing process impediments, that was just, making it so it's not too hard to develop in the city. I thought this was interesting to prioritize development of housing for less than 40% AMI. So that sort of goes to their equitable and fair housing. One of the things that they had as a goal, but I don't think they've started yet, I don't know, maybe you can ask their boss down there, is create a community land trust.
They have.
And this is interesting. We'll talk a little bit about what a community land trust is in a minute. And then just improve their existing housing stock and create affordable home ownership. And I wanted to read you this. This is such a big issue across the nation. Just this housing thing is not just Ogden, obviously, that's facing it, as Glenn shared at the very beginning when we started these. But I thought this was kind of a shout out to what our community and economic development people are doing. This was an article that was just in the Tribune or Deseret News a couple of days ago called, like many U.S. cities, Salt Lake finds it can't build its way out of affordable housing shortage. And they've been working with the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute up at the U. And since 2016, Salt Lake City spent $38 million on affordable housing initiatives. And so let me see. Gardner Institute analyst told the Salt Lake City Council affordable housing initiatives are helping, but they urge city leaders to continue seeking creative ways to not only build new affordable units, but also preserve and renovate existing affordable housing. Does that sound familiar? We're not going to build our way out of the affordable problem, but we can rehab our way out of it, Esky said. Esky is Dion Esky from the Kempsey Gardner. He said, Esky told leaders to find the low-hanging fruit through policies applauding city leaders for recently voting to allow accessory dwelling units. He said more policy changes like that throughout Salt Lake County will allow communities to renovate existing housing into affordable housing without threat of gentrification. The biggest bang for your buck is rehabbing instead of building from the ground up. So I just thought that was really interesting kind of commentary on what they're recommending. So back to the Community Land Trust. So there's about 160 community land trusts operating in the U.S., and this actually started in the South to help African-American sharecroppers find a way to have control over their land. So it's been around for a long time. Now they sort of run by nonprofit and they're community-based organizations. So this community-based organization or nonprofit owns the land, and then they lease to people those houses that are built on the land. And they're long-term leases. So think sort of like we do at the airport, where the airport city owns all of the property, but we lease space for the hangars, and the hangars are actually owned by the hangar owners. So these trusts put together, so it's a combination of leaseholders, the community members, so not just people that live on that trust land, but people from the community, government representatives, funding agencies, and public interest groups. And these leases include a resale formula so that when they turn around and resell it, they can accumulate part of the increase that's been, but they also figure out a way to keep those affordable into the future. One of the other things was, I think, is kind of making a comeback, is something they refer to now as co-living or pod share. Really, it's sort of a single room occupancy type of format where there's shared kitchens, living rooms, and other common spaces, and maybe just a private or maybe even a shared bedroom. But in metropolitan areas, these can be really high end if you want to be. So they come fully furnished. They're sort of they have special spaces, and they have somebody that manages entertainment. So it can be really high end, or it can be just sort of more basic, like boarding house or something like that. Rent controls and subsidies. These are things that, Glenn mentioned that as well, where there's some sort of restriction on the amount a lease or a rent or whatever can increase year over year. Mortgage support, that a lot of jurisdictions use this, where it could just be financial counseling, or it could be direct financial assistance. Where the city acts as the bank, so it could be revolving loan funds, lease to purchases, grants. And like I mentioned, most of these heavy subsidies are in the really large metropolitan areas like Fairfax County, Virginia, which is just outside DC, or in California in the higher density areas. So those are some things that are happening in other jurisdictions. But, you also have the option of just looking at what we're doing, continuing what we're doing, even accelerating the current policy and programs, or maybe adding in one of these other things that Amy and Glenn have talked about. So right now, we have the Quality Neighborhood Initiative. Council's right now funding that at $1 million a year. And they're using their neighborhood revitalization strategy, the home and help programs. So these are all CDBG funded programs. And it really sort of focuses on that block level action plan that Ward talked about in his presentation, and how they're just kind of going block by block and kind of determining by the area, by the neighborhood, what's best for that particular area. One of the other things that I thought was interesting is most recently the National League of Cities came out with a housing report called Housing Market Conditions Across American Cities. And they took a look at 754 cities with populations greater than 50,000, so across the whole United States, and Ogden was one of them. And they divided those cities into 6 different areas. And they looked at things like the poverty levels and the AMI and those kinds of things to make these determinations. So they divided up into high opportunity cities, growing cities, rent burden cities, that's where Salt Lake came in, multifamily deficit cities, wealth pocket cities, that was South Jordan, and transit desiring cities, and that's where Ogden fell. So these are the things that they determined for transit desiring cities. That it's a low median income, lowest job growth, lowest owner occupancy, lowest gender income gap, highest non-white population growth, medium public transit access, and then low building permits for single family and average for multifamily. And in this section, it says, without policy action, residents in these cities may not be able to experience the economic mobility that would be gained through access to public transportation. So once again, I think it shows sort of the forward thinking of our own community economic development staff. Greg mentioned that we just went through this Ogden on Board study that they worked with UTA. And so that's a whole basis of Ogden on Board was to sort of preserve the mix of equitable housing. This is from their document. You haven't seen it yet, but it's coming. Enhancing access to essential services, creating well-designed and welcoming stops and station areas, providing improved active transportation connections and greater connectivity to the regional transit system. And of course, we know that the BRT is coming. I think the mayor said next year. So that's a great, I think it just really, again, kudos to the administrative staff for being ahead of the game, right? The policy recommendations from the NLC report for this type of transit need that Ogden was identified as. It says connect development to improve transit options and lock in permanent affordability, encourage joint development with transit agencies, and foster entrepreneurship and cooperative business ownership models. The other one was reduce impact fees and exactions. I crossed it out because we don't have those. So that just leaves us with still 3. But I think we're, as far as the National League's report, we're in a really great position. So those are just a few really things, as I mentioned when we started this 3 weeks ago, that we could spend 2 years on this if you wanted. That the only way we could figure out how to help you with this was even just these 4 weeks that we're studying. So a lot of information that we've given you to digest, and next week we hope that we're going to kind of review it for you, and then you can have some discussions about where you think you'd like to go, where you need more information, what kinds of goals you'd like to see, and how staff, or both council or administrative staff, can help you reach those. So do you have any other questions?
It's like someone's raising their hand.
I do. You mentioned early on that this is really better handled at a county level.
I'm just saying wherever I saw those large subsidies,
Right.
It was at the county level.
It seems, that's probably my ongoing concern is that, Ogden is carrying a large burden of the county's load. We have some enlightening conversations that are happening at the county level that are kind of maybe making some difference with some of the mayors of the smaller communities that are in our county. And I can't see us solving the problem without our surrounding communities personally. We can do some things like rehab the uninhabitable affordable housing that we have. That's something that I think we ought to certainly focus heavily on. But I think we've got to reach out to our partners in the county to solve this problem.
Yeah, and I think basically, like I said, the city's been ahead of the game for a long time. Under Tom Christopoulos's guidance, he's really pushed this idea that mixed income is makes the most healthy neighborhoods, and so we've been working towards that. And I think because the city's been working on this for long, we are benefiting from the fact that all of a sudden it's been raised to the national level. There's talking about it at the state. There's been some threats about state legislation, about tying transportation dollars to affordable housing permits, those kinds of things. So I think that the city can only benefit from that. And I think we do have a county commission that's willing to to engage now. I haven't been here forever, but I don't know that we've always had that. So I think that it's great that it's coming to light, maybe because of the issues that Salt Lake's facing and Park City and some of those others.
I attended a meeting yesterday, and that item came up, is that most of the funding of the projects are south of Salt Lake City or North Salt Lake. And if we're going to encourage more development here in the north end, is that all the communities have to work together. And I think they realize that process of working together in the aspects. But also what came out is in that meeting is that transit, I believe, is the essential item that's going to make Ogden different. And I think that's a crucial aspect of our growth cycle is transit, how we develop the concepts of transit. Is our bus lines adequate for the move to people around? Do we have to do something more? How do we encourage more individuals to gravitate to transit? Weber State's not going to build any more parking lots. It just doesn't pen for their success up there. And so transit's important to them, just as it is important to us here.
Any other questions for me?
Any questions?
No, I just have some quick comments, and I want to thank you. I think one of the things that we've talked about, and I don't know what we're thinking about moving forward, but I do think there's a lot of policy. One, I think we need to continue to push on the pedal with quality neighborhoods, rehabbing the houses, doing the things that Ward is doing, and because I do think that is making a difference within that community. I also think policy set around density, around our transit-oriented areas are going to be really important. Right now, we love to see the mountains, we love to see all of that, but as we look out there and say, okay, should it be a 3-story, 4-story, 10-story, we need to make sure that we are looking at the right thing and for our growth. I think it was Glenn that said, there's some disadvantages to the types of zonings that we're looking at. In that, I do think that there is probably a more opportunity for us to push middle income people out of housing as we start to look at inclusionary zones, just because of the makeup of our community. So and then the last thing I would caution is this: it will become quickly and easily to divide low income from high income families, because I think a lot of places where we can build will build, and it will be and encourage lower income, and it will quickly divide a city. So we have to be very careful in where we are looking at putting high density or putting multifamily, and not be afraid to put it up in a R1 zone. So just looking at our policies around that, because it can be quick to divide our city quickly. So.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, that's a tension I'm definitely feeling around this thought around. So, I think one of our neighbors, Travis, brought it up that we spent a lot of effort in certain areas of the city downzoning to single-family homes, and the quality neighborhood seems to be focused in that way, and I see advantage to that, but I also feel there's a tension around, thinking that if we have an extra unit, either in our basement or upstairs, our garage or backyard, that somehow that diminishes the quality of life in a neighborhood. And I just don't think that's true. I just don't think it's true. I do understand why we don't want to cut up giant houses and into many, many different apartments, but I just think there's so many advantages to maybe boosting someone's income through doing something like that, but also we need places for people to stay, and we do need it to be included in all the neighborhoods. We don't need it to be focused in one particular area, although I do agree that it needs to be zoned around the transportation too. So I think there's a really big tension and mindset shift that needs to happen around renters and what they look like and what they do to a community. And I think that's a challenge that we have to face and face it head on, because this problem is not going to go away. That's for sure.
I agree with Councilmember Stevens, and I think there's a lot of things we can do around transit as well. Just frequency, and I think the more frequency we have, the quicker that it will be to drop the rates, and so it's pretty expensive, and so there's things that we can do around transit, even with the city, to help with some of the rates that.
I think there's three components to our challenge that we're looking at, and number one is transit, and not in that order what I mentioned, but transit is very important, but land use is the other aspect, and then zoning. We have to look at how we're zoning these areas so that we can encourage growth and development, and on the same time protecting the neighborhoods and strengthening the neighborhoods. If you destroy a neighborhood, it takes years of bringing that back in the capacity of the growth and protection that it would need.
I'd say generations.
Yeah, it could be.
What is our next step, do you think?
Well, next week. Oh, next week some more.
Yes. So next week we'll have Cameron Deal from the Utah League of Cities is going to speak to you for a few minutes, and then we as staff will kind of summarize. And I believe most of the people that presented will be here in case you have asked specific questions for them. And then it's open for discussion about where you want to go.
Different items we might want to research further, or
sorry, I think I might have missed that. You did say that.
That's okay. Well, that's good for everybody else to know too.
We're not at 11:30.
I know. Well, it's not over yet.
Yeah, we're not out of here yet.
Let's not get too optimistic.
Well, one thing I think we also need to take into consideration is whatever we do, its effect on our tax base. Because we really need to grow our tax base some too. In order to keep from having our income, our property taxes go crazy. So.
They're just going to keep going up. Even if we don't raise them ourselves, they're going to continue to get higher. And that's where some people can benefit from having extra people living in their house to help them pay too. It's true.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions or comments about that topic?
No.
So then we'll go back to public comment. We'll reconvene.
Yeah, do we need to convene this and then reconvene the other?
Oh, it just recessed, so do we have to?
I don't think, I don't think there's an adjournment, is there?
Yeah, we didn't adjourn, really.
No.
Yeah, you can just reconvene the meeting.
Okay, we reconvene the
meeting. Do you need to do anything special?
Here we are. Here we are. We're back in the meeting. I know we left
Still
from
in
it.
public comment.
Yes, we're on public comment. If you'd like to comment about any item, you may come up and state your name for the record at the microphone, and you have about 3 minutes.
I'm on it.
It's my first time I've ever done
please, just state your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
My name is Jenny Brechterfield, and I just had a few comments about, as far as the developments that we have coming here in Utah. We have a 30% housing shortage right now. We're supposed to grow by 1 million people over the next 6 years. I just feel like if we put too many restrictions on these developers that are wanting to come in and build more of these housing options, and by putting restrictions on, making some more affordable, it is hurting the other people. That money's got to be paid for somewhere. So, early on in our marriage, we were always like right in the middle, just not quite enough to make it to low income, but just barely over that we were eating ramen noodles every day. And I just think that a lot of this development, please don't forget about those people. The Own in Ogden programs have been just stellar. I'm really proud of what Ogden has done so far, and to beautify our city and make it and bring it to one of the top best places to live in the nation. I think it's really important. But what I have noticed lately is for example, my son bought a house last year, about a year and a half ago, for $134,000, a little great Own in Ogden 2-bedroom home. It's fantastic. If he were to turn around and sell that today, it'd be $180,000, and he's done nothing to it. But the thing that I found frustrating is that other people wanting to buy just maybe didn't qualify by $300. There was nothing in it for somebody who was in the middle. And also those homes that are being renovated, if they are all being sold to low income, then what about the ones who are in between and they just want a beautiful home and there's no program for them? So I just think we need to loosen, if it's possible, loosen the rules on those homes that you guys have been working so hard on, so that it encourages the city as a whole to make it better and more well-rounded, and not just targeting people who are low income. Because there's a lot of families who are in between and literally they can't afford anything. They just can't. So, and we need to bring more apartments here, townhouses, all those things. They must happen. But I think if we put too many rules and regulations on those developers, why would they invest in Ogden? I just don't see any purpose in it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Are we able to stay on the housing thing too?
Yes, any topic.
This is just public comment, though. You already used yours, Ralph.
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Sorry, Ralph. Yeah, it's not a whole new session. We recessed and then we came back to the public comment. You're right. I'm getting confused.
Sorry, Ralph.
Travis spoke on the other item, so he's welcome to do public comment.
And waiting.
Hi. Yeah. So I do appreciate the tremendous amount of labor and effort that goes into these aspects of the meeting. Besides just those things that you do at work that you all take home things home with you too. So as far as Travis Pate. So my name's officially there and back on the record. I just basically want to say I celebrate our neighborhood. I think auxiliary dwelling units and some of those other things are been historic aspects. The more and more I research the neighborhood, the more I see so-and-so has a room for rent. So-and-so has a room for rent. So many places that have allowed that aspect of life to allow a working class somewhere to be. And I think that's the dynamic and uniqueness of our neighborhood is that we've been built on the working class, but we've also been built on just by the empire builders, so to speak. But the empire builders, if you look at Thomas D's history, beyond impoverished when he got here, and through circumstance and hard work. And I think the same thing that when it talks about aspects of mobility of housing choices, that'd be so great to be able to help people actually have a business plan. Nationally, people move every 5 to 7 years without change of job, without change of anything. Just the statistics show that. And so if someone comes in and says, here's my Own in Ogden money, how do I turn this over in 7 years and just go to the next house so someone else can now have this Own in Ogden home? There's some tremendous things. And like I said, I appreciate Mr. Montgomery, all the work. I apologize that I missed the meeting. I'm actually now on the Bridging the Gap committee for the Weber County Jail. Sheriff Arbonne said, hey, get in here. And I was like, excuse me? And so that's why I was late. I missed his presentation. The only part that I wanted to address with regards to the CBD, it says anything more than 3 units, dwelling units has to be 50 feet wide. It's only a 40.5-foot lot. So I don't know how you just passed that. And then as far as the Adams Avenue CRA, only when they come for money that we initiate that plan? What? No. The plan's the plan's a blanket plan that says, here's the development we'd like to see. Here's the setbacks. Here's the integration to the historic neighborhood. Get the spreadsheet and find out how many historic resources are protected by landmarks and see how little of East Central is actually protected. because we can bulldoze how much of that and build to the densities that would meet all the housing needs we have and need with no protections. And yet the foresight of Mr. Montgomery and Ward Ogden and Aaron Wolf Bertling and Bill Wright and all the others that said, hey, let's do a national district. Let's get historic tax credits. Let's do these types of things for this neighborhood. Do we just put them out the window, or do we actually proactively say, okay, anything demolition-wise in East Central has to go to landmarks, period. We don't need to worry about your paint color, how tall your rain gutters are, but there needs to be protection. So we're willing, from a neighborhood perspective, to readdress the East Central Community Plan, since it's been 2009 since we started it, and it's 10 years. So please help us to help you. We're not adversarial about any and every development. It's do it right. We have to obey lists. You guys should too. 50-foot lot, it's only 40 feet, and you just approved it. I don't get it. Why do you guys not have to follow the law?
Your time's up. Any other comments? Oh, let's race.
Taylor Knut, 726 25th Street. I want to speak to my experience on accessory dwelling units. I'm a product of an accessory dwelling unit. When I moved back from a little trip across the country, I lived in my sister's spare bedroom in Clinton City, paid her $250 a month. I know it's more of an informal accessory dwelling unit, but regardless, it gave me and my husband Sean the opportunity to save money for a down payment for a home in Ogden. When I moved to Ogden, I did the same thing for my little sister. She had just finished college at Weber. She needed a place to stay. She's still with us 2 years later. But I want to speak to the reality of accessory dwelling units as Angela was speaking to earlier. They provide income where there wouldn't otherwise be an empty room up in my upstairs. My sister has a private entrance. She's quiet. She parks her car in the back of my house. And I want to speak to our desire to build an accessory dwelling unit above a future garage in our home, in our neighborhood in East Central Ogden. And I also caution this body in regards to accessory dwelling units to be really aware of the not in my backyard mentality when it comes to accessory dwelling units. If we're going to have them, they should be permitted across the entire community so that our residents in East Central have the same access to this permit that someone in the East Bend or West Ogden, North Ogden, Southeast Ogden would have. And also speaking to the issue that was brought up earlier in regards to the recent police-involved shooting. Speaking with the previous public commenters, I think even though all of them have left, I think that we deserve a response. They deserve a response from this body and this administration as to the concerns that they raised. I think they were a little bit upset that we took a recess and then they had to wait an hour and a half to participate in that level of civic engagement, which is what we should be encouraging. Thank you.
Hello, Angel Castillo. Sorry I missed the meeting. I had a previous engagement, but this was really the juicy part. Again, I commend you for doing this hard work and this research. It's overwhelming. There's a lot of it, and we are in a challenging place. And as Janine or maybe Amy brought up in the report, that we really and truly cannot build our way out of this problem. But what we have to do is we have to set a series of achievable goals that will help relieve the pressure. And I'd like to kind of address a couple of the things that were talked about here. ADUs and tiny homes are a way to add gentle density. It's not intense density. If we're going to have intense density, it should be along a transit line, and we can definitely advocate that in the plan. And with regards to tiny homes, I think it's really important when I hear some of the comments of who would want that, or who would live there, or what about a big family? You have to remember that you are making plans for people who aren't you, that don't have your wants and your desires, and we are looking for people like Taylor, who it was allowable for a source of income. It was a stepping stone to get to property ownership. And it was Warren Buffett actually is heavily investing in Clayton homes. They're opening up. They're $109,000 in Alabama, Georgia, Kansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. And I'm thinking if Warren Buffett is behind this idea, maybe it's something that we should really take a good hard look at. And as a planning commissioner, I fully support the fact that it should be on a foundation and should be hooked up with water and sewer. And I've heard the objections, well, then it's going to be really, really expensive. It is still significantly less expensive than it is to buy a single family home here in Ogden, especially for someone whose combined income is less than $60,000. Developer benefits for inclusionary zoning, I don't buy for a minute that we are going to not have development come here. There are plenty of developers across the United States that are all on board for inclusionary zoning. One, because Ogden has low land costs. They get dollar for dollar tax benefits from the federal government. They get density bonuses, and more units means more money for developers. And they get parking reductions. Parking reductions are huge for a developer because parking costs them. They are all about square footage, and a parking spot costs more than 12 stories above it, because those could be particular units. So I highly encourage you to remain open while you make these considerations and think about things that are not necessarily would I want to live there, but what's best for Ogden? What do we need as we grow? And you're charged with thinking 10 to 15 years down the road for an increase that is coming, and it's verified. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? See any movement. Mayor, would you like to make any comments?
Sure. I'll just address a couple of things really quickly. I appreciated everybody that came and spoke earlier, and feel bad that they didn't get a chance to hear us respond. It is an open, independent investigation that's going on, and so before we get in front of that, we want to make sure we understand what the facts are. And so there has been some frustration, but I want everybody to know that we've heard and listened to every one of those comments that have been made. And it's important that we allow that investigation to continue and to give them the ability to do that. And so I'm very sensitive to the emotion and to the sense of loss and frustration and everything else. And as was mentioned, sometimes government does move slow, but we've got to give them the opportunity to make a thorough investigation on that. But we have heard, we've listened, and we've appreciated them being here and sharing where they're at. And so some of that public engagement and dialogue will occur once we do have those facts at hand. I do want to thank the council staff and you all for this housing study. We hear a lot about it. We work with Ward and Jeremy and Tom all the time, and so we get a great deal of that, but a lot of it's come up, and this is an issue that everybody needs to be looking at. And so taking a deep dive like this really does help everybody understand what we're doing, what's working, what might not be working, where we need to make some tweaks. And so I'm looking forward to Cameron coming next week and comparing apples to apples in terms of other communities along the Wasatch Front. But I know that's that takes a lot of work to do all that research and all those other communities, and we appreciate everything you guys have done. And Greg, I appreciate your help in helping guide them through that and giving them direction for where to find some of those resources. And then as Ward's maybe not falling asleep in the back of their room, we appreciate everything that you've done with this, Ward. You've been very progressive, and Ogden's doing things that no other community along the Wasatch Front is doing right now. And so those efforts are recognized and appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you. Other council comments?
I have a couple. I think we need to review as a council, see if we can give John and Vern some support on this event at Marshall White. I'm not sure, Mayor, if there's anything we can look at with that fee, but maybe we could look into it and see if there's any latitude there for that event. They mentioned donations, but I think what we ought to try to work with them to suggest that if you come to the event that you bring in non-parish or canned goods so that we can donate that to maybe the Utah food storage aspects of it, just as a suggestion. The other comment about the Southeast Community Plan, we just had a work session with Greg Montgomery, and Greg, it was very informative, and I appreciate the work there. but we are moving ahead. There isn't, when the comment says it seems like we're doing nothing, this is moving forward. The Planning Commission is looking at it, and we've had several open houses, and another report is going to come forward. So I think we are moving in a positive direction for that community to take a look and see what needs to be done there. I again want to congratulate Ward Ogden. I think he does an outstanding job in what is happening here. I also am mindful of the comment this evening, and I'm trying to be mindful of that, the middle section. And I think that's very crucial for us. We look at the high end and we look at the low income, but it's the middle section that we need to be concerned also to take a look at and see if there's any help that can be assisted in the housing. I'm looking forward to that, to report and find out exactly where our housing, and that's just the starting point. We have many, many more sessions to talk about housing for our community. Weber State by 14.
I guess I'll take a minute and talk about the Diversity Commission. I was glad that they were here tonight. I appreciate the good work that they do. I was on the committee that kind of went through that whole deal when we were forming them and putting that ordinance together. And I maintain that we have a lot more in common than we have that divides us. And we need to explore those things and to get to know one another on personal levels to where we can, connect on those levels. We don't need to be afraid of one another. I think that's an important thing that we continue to work on. We as a council have pretty well come together amongst our diversity, and we've built friendships. And I think that could happen throughout the whole city. We need to model that and to continue to encourage it. Also, I want to talk a little about ADUs. I am a huge proponent of ADUs because I think they do have a huge benefit to not only the people that live in them, but the people that live in the home that sponsors them. It allows people to own a home much earlier and to stay in their home much longer, all while there's somebody there to kind of pick up some needs if you're elderly, or help with mortgage payments if you're just squeaking by. The mitigating factor is that the homeowner needs to live in that home. That pretty well mitigates the issues with that renters sometimes have issues with. Most people don't even know they have an ADU in their neighborhood sometimes. I do want to make a plea to those who are living in an ADU, or those who are hosting an ADU, come get the permit. We'd like to know how to help with all that. But if you're staying under the radar, it's just hard for us to know what to do. So get the permit. Weber by 14.
I want to thank everyone that spoke today, our citizens and our staff and everyone in general. Just a quick comment. I think that the public speaking, the public comment section of part of our meetings is the most sacred part for me. And so I think that we made mistakes. I believe that. And if I'm alone in my opinion, I understand. But I think we need to plan what we're doing today a little bit better. So that first, we're not here. If somebody has a concern that we're here late and that we're keeping our partners that want to engage in this special topic conversation with us, then that we need to do something so that we're not here that late and we're not keeping it here that late. And if we're not concerned about it, then we need to respect the public comment section, and because that's the most sacred part. in my mind. Thank you. I'm trying to be very, very polite so that I don't upset anybody. Thanks.
Just let everybody go. Yeah, and I think so. I think when we set up these fact-finding work sessions, we were gauging it based on our kind of norm of the time that we had public comment. So, we put a 7 o'clock time on the agenda when we posted it. So I think maybe next week we will reconsider that so that then, especially if it's just really mostly us talking, we can let the people know that are coming that it might be later. Because I agree that I don't want to disenfranchise people that are coming to talk with us about any topic. This is the kind of engagement we have always wanted. I feel bad that it's under these circumstances, but we certainly don't want to devalue the public coming to provide input. So that's what I have to say about that. But then also, on a lighter note, I do want to tell everybody about Utah Walk Week. Speaking of active transportation, right? This week there's a Move Utah Active Transportation Conference happening. And so next week, September 30th to October 5th, is Utah Walk Week. So I'm going to challenge all my council members, try to use some active transportation next week sometime for fun. You could walk somewhere or bike or take some of the public transportation yourself. I tried it last year, but I'll try again. This year I have to figure out my schedule because I do a lot of moving around.
I do walk to work every day.
That's awesome. I do appreciate that. How long of a walk is that, should we say?
It's a long walk.
It's 40 feet.
Yeah.
You work from home.
Walks to work every day. It's awesome.
Yeah.
No, there's no air pollution or anything up there. That's great. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming.
Can I bring one more thing up?
Go for
In
it.
the Adams rezone, we had 2 no votes, and we didn't give opportunities to explain the no vote. Might be nice to have them in the minutes, unless you don't want to.
Oh, I think I said why I voted no, and it's just that because it feels to me that block feel piecemeal, like we're piecemealing that block, and I would just like to know more about the project that is going to go on there instead of, because I like your point, Rich, when you said that. I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said if we need to go back and change it so that, right? So I just feel like we're doing it backwards. So that's why.
I guess I kind of answered that too. Is I just didn't feel so strongly enough about it because I feel like there's more to it than what was there. But obviously, certain times developers or people can't divulge all the information. I'm just not sure if the whole detail is there. If I knew the whole detail, I might be totally on board. Yeah.
And I'm actually I am in support of probably designating the whole block.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a half quarter kind of. So just kind of piecemealing another lot that just feels a little weird to me. Okay. But hey, thanks for bringing that up.
I just thought it would be nice to have them in the minutes so we can read those.
That's good.
Anybody like to?
You ready for a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Then it's so moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Heyer, second by Councilmember Lopez to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.